Hey everyone. Welcome back to Harry Reality Bender. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry fled to Japan at age 7 and mastered ancient Eastern sorcery before returning to defeat Voldemort? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The boy who ran the cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. Harry knew this because he had measured it, first with his hands, then with his feet, then eventually with a piece of string he'd found wedged beneath the skirting board. He had nothing else to do in there. No books. No toys. A thin mattress that smelled like old shoes, a single blanket that was more whole than fabric, and a bare bulb that Uncle Vernon switched off from outside whenever he decided Harry had been allowed enough light for one evening. Harry was 7 years old and he had already learned several important things about the world. The first was that the Dursleys hated him. Not in the casual, irritable way that Dudley sometimes hated his vegetables or the way Aunt Petunia hated the neighbors' wind chimes. They hated Harry with a focused, deliberate energy that occasionally frightened even them. He'd seen it in Uncle Vernon's eyes once, a flash of something almost like unease, right after Harry had regrown his hair overnight after Aunt Petunia had hacked it down to the scalp. Vernon had looked at the thick black hair sitting perfectly on Harry's head the next morning and gone a particular shade of grey before the anger flooded back in to replace whatever that other thing had been. The second thing Harry had learned was that strange things happened around him when he was upset or frightened. Not always. Not predictably. But enough times that he'd started to understand there was a pattern to it, even if he couldn't name it. The third thing, and this was the one he'd learned most recently, most painfully, was that nobody was coming to help him. He'd understood this in a theoretical sense for years. There were no relatives who called, no neighbors who knocked to check on the skinny boy who was always doing yard work while the fat blonde one watched television. His teachers smiled at him in a distracted, bureaucratic way and wrote things like satisfactory and quiet student on his reports, and went home to their own lives. The world was very large and Harry was very small and nobody in it was paying attention. But he'd understood it in the bone-deep, final way on the night of June the 2nd, when Dudley and his gang caught him behind the school, and what followed was bad enough that Harry lay in the cupboard afterward unable to find a position that didn't hurt, and he waited, genuinely waited, with a child's last stubborn hope, for someone to come. A teacher. A neighbor. Anyone. Nobody came. He lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to the television through the floor above him, the canned laughter rising and falling, and something in his chest did a thing he didn't have a name for. Not breaking, exactly. More like a door closing. Quietly. With a very final click. Nobody is coming, he thought. So I have to go. He didn't plan it. Planning required time and resources and Harry had neither. What he had was the feeling, which had been building for days like pressure behind a wall, and then the wall came down. It happened just after midnight. Uncle Vernon had come to lock the cupboard's exterior bolt, smelling of whiskey and the particular sour rage that meant the day at work had gone badly, and he'd looked at Harry through the slats with an expression Harry recognized, and Harry had looked back at him and thought, with perfect clarity, no. Not as a word he said out loud. As a fact. A load-bearing wall of pure refusal, erected somewhere behind his sternum, and it was different from every other time because this time he wasn't afraid. Vernon reached for the bolt. The hallway light exploded. Not the bulb, the fixture. The entire fitting tore itself from the ceiling with a sound like a thunderclap, and Vernon stumbled back with a shout, and in the dark and confusion Harry pushed open the cupboard door, which had somehow become unlocked, and he walked out. Past Vernon, who was pressed against the wall with plaster dust in his hair, making a sound like a kettle with a blocked spout. Past the kitchen, where he grabbed the only food he could reach quickly, half a loaf of bread and an apple, and stuffed them into his school rucksack along with his blanket. Through the front door, which he'd never been allowed to use, which opened smoothly under his hand. Out into the June night, which was warm and smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and Harry walked quickly up Privet Drive without looking back, and he did not stop. He walked for a long time. Long enough that the suburban streets gave way to a dual carriageway, and then to a service road, and then to nothing in particular, just empty tarmac under sodium lights and the distant sound of motorway traffic. His feet hurt. The places where Dudley's friends had kicked him still ached. He ate the bread while he walked because he was very hungry and because the bread wouldn't keep. He was sitting on the verge of a beer road somewhere in Surrey, eating the apple in the dark, when he realized the feeling hadn't gone away. It had grown. It sat in the center of his chest like a coal, hot, dense, radiating. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fear. It was something older than both, something he didn't have language for. His hands were trembling slightly against the apple, and the grass around him was moving without wind, and the air tasted strange, metallic, like the moment before lightning. Harry looked at his hands. The trembling moved up his arms. I want to go somewhere safe, he thought, and the thought had a clarity to it he'd never experienced before, a sharpness, as though someone had cleaned the lens of a camera he hadn't known was dirty. Somewhere nobody can find me and nobody can hurt me and I can. He didn't finish the thought. The world came apart. It wasn't painful, exactly. It was more like being turned inside out and then outside in very quickly, and there was no sound, or rather there was every sound at once, compressed into a single moment of roaring totality, and then it stopped. Harry opened his eyes. He was no longer in Surrey. He was lying on his back in the middle of a dirt path, staring up at a sky so full of stars it didn't look real. The air hit him like cold water, thin and crisp and carrying pine on it, and something else beneath that, something green and alive and very ancient. His ears were ringing. His body felt like it had been wrung out and hung up to dry. He sat up slowly. Mountains. Mountains on all sides, enormous and utterly silent, their peaks holding the last of the snow in blue-white sheets. A forest of cedar and pine ran down the slopes, thick and dark, broken here and there by the pale ribbon of a path or the geometric lines of a rice terrace stepped into the hillside. Below him, perhaps a kilometer down the mountain, he could make out lights, small, warm, yellow lights in the shapes of windows. Harry sat very still for a moment, breathing the cold air. Then he burst into tears. Not from sadness, exactly. From the sheer enormity of having done something, even if he had no idea what it was or where he was, and finding himself still alive on the other side of it. He cried the way you do when the danger is past and your body finally remembers it was terrified, great ugly heaving sobs that seemed too large for him, and he let them come because there was no one to see and he was alone on a mountain in the middle of the night and it didn't matter. He cried for about 4 minutes. Then he wiped his face on his sleeve, picked up his rucksack, and looked around for the path. The old man found him approximately 40 minutes later. Harry had been following the dirt path downhill, the reasonable thing to do, when a lantern appeared around the bend ahead of him, swinging with the unhurried pace of someone who walked these paths every night and had long since stopped finding them remarkable. Harry stopped. The lantern stopped. A silence. "You are not local," said a voice, in English, which under the circumstances Harry found extraordinary. "No," Harry agreed. The lantern came closer and resolved itself into an elderly Japanese man of perhaps 70, wearing a dark kimono and wooden sandals, carrying the lantern on a long bamboo pole. He was short, maybe 5'4", with white hair cropped close and a face that had been weathered into something resembling a very old piece of bark, deeply lined, surprisingly expressive, currently radiating a kind of measured calm that Harry associated with people who had seen a great deal and been disturbed by very little of it. The old man looked at Harry for a long moment. His eyes went to the rucksack, the school uniform Harry still wore, the dark bruising visible on Harry's forearms where the sleeves had ridden up. He looked at Harry's eyes, which were still red-rimmed, and at his hands, which had stopped trembling but hadn't entirely returned to normal, still carrying that faint luminous quality that showed up sometimes in Harry's skin when he'd done something large. "You came through the mountain," the old man said. It wasn't quite a question. "I don't know where I came through," Harry said honestly. "No." The old man tilted his head slightly. "You would not. That kind of jump, at your age, you are how old?" 7. Something crossed the old man's face. Not quite surprise. More like recognition, or perhaps confirmation of something he'd been half expecting for a very long time. He turned without another word and began walking back the way he'd come. He glanced back once, lantern swinging. "Come," he said. "There is tea." Harry followed him. The house was small and very clean, set into the hillside as though the mountain had grown it there. Sliding shoji screens, a low roof of dark tile, a garden even in the darkness visibly precise, raked gravel, a stone lantern, a cedar tree so old it had grown into a shape that looked deliberate. Inside, the old man, who told Harry his name was Isamu Kurosawa, moved around the kitchen with efficient, unhurried movements, setting water to boil and assembling cups. Harry sat on a floor cushion at a low table and tried not to stare at the things on the shelves. Shelves were interesting in the way that things become interesting when you're very good at observing and have had a great deal of time with nothing to do but observe. Most of the shelves were books, Japanese characters he couldn't read, plus a scattering of English titles and a few in what might have been Latin. But on one shelf, arranged with the deliberate precision of things that matter, sat a collection of objects that made Harry's chest do the warm cold thing again, a length of polished dark wood roughly the shape and size of a wand. A bowl of water that reflected light in a way that wasn't quite right for the angle. Several small stones that sat perfectly still in a way that for some reason made Harry feel they were only pretending. And a photograph in a plain frame, a young man, Japanese, smiling, somewhere mountainous. He looked away from the photograph when he realized it was private. Isamu brought the tea, green, no milk, which Harry had never had before, and sat across the table and looked at Harry with the kind of attention that wasn't uncomfortable, just very thorough. "Tell me," he said simply. So Harry did. He told it plainly, the way he'd learned to report things, facts first, feelings secondarily, nothing embellished because embellishment had always been used against him, always become evidence of his strangeness, his difficult nature, his tendency to make things up. He told Isamu about the cupboard and the Dursleys and Dudley's gang and the night the ceiling light exploded and the road and the apple and the mountain. Isamu listened without interrupting. He held his tea in both hands and watched Harry's face, and he didn't flinch at any of it, which Harry found immediately reassuring. Adults who heard about the cupboard usually either didn't believe him or became very loud about it in a way that felt performative and made everything worse. When Harry finished, Isamu was quiet for a moment. "The thing you did to arrive here," he said at last. "You have done things like this before." "Smaller things. I made my hair grow back once. I ended up on the school roof when some kids were chasing me." Harry paused. "Things break sometimes, near me, when I'm angry." "When you are afraid," Isamu corrected gently. Harry opened his mouth to argue and then didn't, because it was true. "Yes," he said. Isamu nodded once, as though confirming something in his own mind. He set down his tea. "My people, those who carry what you carry, what I carry, we call it by a different name than they do in the West. Ki. Life force. Intent made physical. You have a great deal of it and no understanding of it, and tonight, under sufficient pressure, it behaved accordingly." "Like steam in a kettle," Harry said. Isamu looked at him with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Exactly like that." "Yes. What do the Western people call it?" "Magic." Isamu said the word the way you'd say the brand name of something you considered inferior to the original. "And they are not entirely wrong. But they work it the way a carpenter works wood, from the outside. Cut here. Nail there. Follow the plan." He picked up the dark wooden wand from the shelf, unhurriedly, easily, as though he'd been about to do it all along, and set it on the table between them. "We work it from the inside. The wood does not need to be shaped. The wood already wants to be what it is meant to be. You only need to understand what that is." Harry looked at the wand. Then at Isamu. "How do you know English?" "I lived in London for 6 years, Isamu said. "A very long time ago. I had reasons to learn." He glanced at the photograph on the shelf, briefly and with the controlled precision of someone who had long since decided exactly how much time they would give to certain memories. I have reasons to keep it sharp. The person in the photograph, Harry said. Not a question. My son, Isamu said. He died. Dark magic, which I could not stop. He said it with a directness that was almost severe. I tell you this not for sympathy. I tell you because it is relevant to the conversation and you should understand who is sitting across from you. I'm sorry, Harry said. So am I, said Isamu, and picked up his tea again. You are very young to be on a mountain alone at midnight. I know. You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will discuss what comes next. He rose with the ease of someone who had spent decades making his body do exactly what he asked of it, and moved toward the back of the house. The guest room is clean. The futon is in the cupboard, the external cupboard, with no lock. He said this last part without looking at Harry, which made it land with more precision than if he'd made it a point. Harry looked at his hands around the teacup. They had stopped glowing entirely. His chest still held the cold feeling, but it had banked down, quieter now. Still there. Kurosawa-san, he said, pulling the honorific from some half-remembered thing a classmate had mentioned once. Isamu paused. Why did you come out on the mountain tonight? In the middle of the night. A long pause. I felt something arrive, Isamu said simply. I have been feeling something like it for several years, getting closer. Like a tide coming in. I came to see what it was. He disappeared through the shoji screen. Harry sat alone in the clean, warm kitchen, listening to the cedar tree move outside in a wind he couldn't hear through the walls, and for the first time in 7 years he did not feel like something to be kept in a cupboard. It was an unusual feeling. He wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. He decided, for now, to finish his tea. In the morning, the mountains were extraordinary. Harry stood on the narrow wooden veranda in bare feet. Isamu had produced a pair of child slippers from somewhere, which fit, which Harry decided not to examine too closely, and the world stretched out around him in the early grey light. The cedar forest ran down into the valley in a dark green wave. The rice terraces on the opposite slope caught the light in stepped silver plains. Somewhere below, a village, small, real, smoke from the first cooking fires rising straight in the cold morning air. He heard Isamu behind him before he saw him, the specific rhythm of sandals on wood. Eat, Isamu said, and handed him a bowl of rice with something green on it and a cup of miso soup. Harry ate on the veranda and watched the village wake up and didn't ask any of the questions he was saving until he'd finished, because that felt like the right protocol. Isamu ate beside him in comfortable silence. You need to contact your people, Harry said, when the bowls were empty. Whoever looks after the magical children. They'll want to know where I am. Isamu was quiet for a moment. Perhaps. But you are 7 years old. You have been living in a cupboard and something in you decided, correctly, that you needed to leave. And something in your magic, a slight emphasis on the word, brought you here. He turned to look at Harry directly. Things with intent do not happen without reason. I do not think you were meant to go back to your cupboard, and I do not think the magical authorities in Britain are an improvement on your cupboard. The magical, Harry blinked. There are magical authorities. A ministry of magic, they call it. Isamu's tone carried that same faint disdain as when he'd said the word magic last night. They have been known, in my experience, to prioritize tidiness over welfare. So what do we do? You stay, Isamu said. Until you are ready to leave. Ready, Harry repeated. Ready for what? Isamu stood, picked up the bowls, and looked at Harry over his shoulder with an expression that would become very familiar over the coming years. The one that meant the answer to that question is what we are here to find out. Come, he said. I will show you the training grounds. The clearing was behind the house, cut into the slope where the mountain leveled briefly before rising again. It was ringed by cedar trees and had at its center a flat circle of bare earth, raked daily, bordered by smooth stones. To one side, a wooden post for striking practice. To the other, a series of carved wooden markers in the ground in no pattern Harry could initially identify. He studied them. "You're going to teach me," Harry said. "I am going to try." Isamu stepped into the clearing and turned to face him. In the daylight, he was smaller than he'd seemed last night, wiry, not tall, dressed plainly in dark gray. But the stillness around him was remarkable. It wasn't absence, Harry thought. It was presence. He took up exactly as much space as he meant to, no more and no less, and every inch of it was intentional. "Everything you have done until now," Isamu said, "has been done through fear or desperation. Your magic has been reactive. You flinch and it explodes. Yes. Yes. The first thing you will learn is not a spell. It is not even a technique. It is a feeling." He held Harry's gaze. "When I ask you to find it, I want you to think about this morning. The rice bowl. The mountain. The smoke from the village." Harry frowned. "What, the feeling of this morning?" "Stillness," Isamu said. "Find it. Carry it. Everything else is built on top of it. Without it, you have only accident." He paused. "And you, Harry, have had quite enough accident." Harry stood in the cleared earth in the morning light, in borrowed slippers on a Japanese mountain, 7 years old and 4,000 miles from Surrey, and tried to find the feeling. He breathed in. The cedar trees were very quiet. He breathed out. Something in his chest, the coal, the pressure, the nameless thing, went very gently still. "There," said Isamu, quietly. "You found it quickly." "It was already there," Harry said. He sounded slightly surprised. "Yes," said Isamu. "It generally is." In Britain, at a school called Hogwarts, a book opened by itself at 3 in the morning and wrote a single line in ink that glowed briefly green before fading: "Harry James Potter, location, unknown." The quill set itself down. The book had been open to this page for 3 months, since Harry Potter turned 7 in July, and his file remained stubbornly devoid of the usual accidental magic reports that filled these pages for most children this age. Something had clearly been happening. The file was dense with low-level notation, the kind of scattered background interference that meant constant, suppressed, uncontrolled magic, but now the file had gone flat. Empty. Not gone. The name still glowed faintly, a sign of life somewhere. Just elsewhere. A portrait on the wall of the adjacent office stirred. An old man with a long silver beard opened one painted eye, regarded the book for a moment, and then closed it again. At the window of a different office, one floor up, a tall man with half-moon spectacles and a deep purple robe stood very still and looked at his own reflection in the glass for a long time. "Well," Albus Dumbledore said, very quietly, to no one in particular. Outside his window, the Scottish mountains were dark and cold and enormous. He turned away from the glass. Harry had been in Japan for 3 weeks before Isamu told him the language. Not taught, told, because it happened the way things sometimes happened around Harry, which was all at once and sideways. They had been sitting with books, Isamu attempting to work through English characters with Harry and Japanese characters with Harry simultaneously, when Harry had looked at a page of kanji and said, slowly, "That one means mountain." Isamu had gone very still. "Which one?" Harry pointed. "Mountain. And that one is forest." He traced with one finger without touching the page. "And that is, it's something about flowing water, but it has something extra at the end, so it means something beyond just water." "Something about," he frowned. "Intent?" "No." "Direction?" "Nagar," Isamu said quietly. "Kino nagare." "Flow of intent." He looked at the boy for a moment. "You understand this language?" "Not all of it." Harry looked at him uncertainly. "Is that wrong?" "It is the opposite of wrong." Isamu stood, went to the shelf, and pulled down a book Harry hadn't been allowed to touch yet, old, leather-bound, its cover marked with symbols that shifted slightly when you looked at them from the corner of your eye. He set it on the table. Your magic is in your comprehension, Harry. When you understand something, truly understand it, not just know the words, it becomes available to you. This is what the Western tradition has never understood. Their children memorize Latin, they do not speak and wave wooden sticks at things and hope. He opened the book to the first page. You simply need to understand. Harry looked at the first page. It was the most complex thing he'd ever seen, characters and diagrams and notations and symbols that seemed to carry weight, actual physical pressure, the way the air changed around a magnet. He felt the coal in his chest respond to it the way a compass needle responds to north. Can I read this? He asked. You are going to read it, Isamu said. All of it. By spring. Harry pulled the book closer. The characters seemed to lean toward him slightly. Yes, he said, and he did not mean it as a question. Below the mountain, the village carried on. Above it, the snow held to the peaks. And in the raked clearing behind the small house in the cedar forest, the wooden practice post had begun to show marks, shallow at first, then deeper, from the hands of a boy who was learning, slowly and with tremendous discipline, what he was made of. It was, by any measure, a very good start. The weeks became months. The months turned, and the mountain changed its dress from green to gold to white and back again. Harry learned to be still, and then to be precise, and then to be something beyond both, something he would not have a word for in English for another 3 years, when Isamu gave it to him at last, Jizai. Complete and effortless freedom. But that was later. For now there was morning practice in cold air, and tea, and a book that bent light around its pages, and an old man who did not treat Harry like a problem to be solved. That was enough. More than enough. It was, for the first time in his life, something close to everything. Chapter 2, 4 years of fire and stillness. The first time Harry made fire, he burned off his own eyebrows. This was 3 months into his training, deep in the grey heart of a Nagano winter, and Isamu had set him the task of lighting a candle, a single red candle on a flat stone in the center of the clearing, without touching it, without speaking, and without the wooden practice wand that Harry had been allowed to hold exactly twice and which Isamu kept locked in the cedar chest by the door with the casual authority of someone who knows exactly how much rope to give. You are thinking about fire, Isamu said, from his position seated on a flat rock at the clearing's edge, wrapped in a dark coat, holding his tea with both hands. He said it the way you'd say you're holding the chopsticks wrong, factual, untroubled. I'm supposed to be thinking about fire, Harry said. He was standing in the center of the clearing in 2 coats and a wool hat pulled down to his glasses, staring at the candle. You are thinking about the idea of fire. The concept. The word. You are thinking about every fire you have ever seen, the kitchen fire, the candles at school at Christmas, I understand, Harry said. Do you? Harry looked at the candle. He emptied out everything Isamu had described, the images, the memories, the word itself. He thought instead about heat. Not the idea of heat. The actual thing, the specific feeling of standing too close to a radiator, the way the skin on the back of your hand reports the presence of something hot before you touch it, the particular quality of air above a warm surface that makes it shimmer. He found the coal in his chest and he directed it, precisely, at the candle wick. The candle lit. Also every cedar tree in a 20-foot radius lit briefly. Harry's eyebrows disappeared in a flash of white heat, and a medium-sized rock exploded. Better, said Isamu, calmly, from behind his raised coat sleeve. Better? Harry touched his forehead. The skin wasn't burned, just very warm, and strangely smooth where the eyebrows had been. He looked at the cedar trees. The small flames were already guttering out against the damp bark. Last week you could not light it at all. This week you lit it and 6 other things. Isamu lowered his sleeve. The trajectory is correct. The calibration needs work. My eyebrows, will return, Isamu said serenely. They always do. They did return, by morning. Thicker than before. Harry chose not to comment on this, and neither did Isamu, which was one of the things Harry had come to appreciate enormously about the old man. He had a gift for treating the extraordinary as simply the next item on the list. What Harry would remember about those 4 years, later, was not the training, though the training was the armature everything else hung on. What he would remember was the texture of ordinary life. The weight of the water bucket from the well before they got the pump working. The sound of the village market on Saturday mornings, the fish seller who always gave Harry an extra piece because he liked that the foreign boy asked for it in careful Japanese, the old women who played shogi on a folding table outside the tea house and who tolerated Harry watching for months before one of them, without looking up from the board, placed a piece in front of the empty chair across from her and waited. He sat down. She destroyed him in 11 moves and looked satisfied. He came back the next week and she destroyed him in 14. The week after that, 22. By spring she was taking 35 moves to beat him, which made her smile in a way that was half pleasure and half warning. He lost to her every Saturday for 8 months. Then he didn't. She looked at the board for a long time after that final game, her defeated pieces arranged in their neat defeated row, and then she looked at Harry, who was trying to keep his face neutral and largely failing, and she said something in the regional dialect that he'd been in Japan long enough to almost but not quite understand. He looked at Isamu that evening. What does kono keo wa abunai mean? Isamu looked up from his book. Something moved in his expression. Where did you hear that? Tanaka-san. After shogi. Isamu was quiet for a moment. Then, it means this child is dangerous. He returned to his book. She means it as a compliment. Does she? From Tanaka-san, it is the highest form of respect. A pause. She said it about me once. I was 43. Harry sat with that for a while. Outside, the spring rain moved through the cedar forest in sighing waves. I'm 8, he said. Yes, said Isamu. She is either very impressed or very frightened. He turned a page. Possibly both. With Tanaka-san it is difficult to distinguish. The second year was when the real work began. Isamu called it kinonagare work, the practice of directed intent, and it was the most demanding thing Harry had ever done, which was saying something considering that for 7 years the most demanding thing in his life had been the garden and Dudley's homework and pretending, in a very specific and exhausting way, to be ordinary. The practice was deceptively simple in concept. You chose a thing, a stone, a cup of water, a candle, eventually more complex objects, and you held your intent upon it. Not forcing. Not commanding. Directing, the way you direct water through a channel by shaping the banks rather than pushing the current. You had to know exactly what you wanted. Vague intent, Isamu told him repeatedly, produced vague results at best and explosive results at worst, and Harry's year of eyebrow-related incidents supported this empirically. What do you want the stone to do? Isamu asked one morning. They were working on Fu no Ugoki, motion without contact, which was the current month's focus. Harry looked at the stone. About the size of his fist, gray, round from the river. Move, he said. Where? To the left. How far left? Harry paused. 6 inches. Why 6 inches? Because, he stopped. Because that's where there's a gap between the other stones. So you wanted to fill the gap? Yes. Then that is what you intend. Not move left 6 inches. You intend, this stone belongs in that gap. Do you feel the difference? Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the gap between the stones. He looked at the stone in front of him. He felt the difference. The stone moved smoothly, settled into the gap with a soft sound of river rock on earth, and stayed there. Isamu looked at it for a moment. Then at Harry. Good, he said, which from Isamu was roughly equivalent to anyone else setting off fireworks. Harry allowed himself exactly 1 second of private satisfaction before Isamu pointed at the next stone. Again. The letters from Britain started arriving in Harry's second year in Nagano. He didn't know who sent them because the first 3 were intercepted by Isamu, who collected them from the post with the serene efficiency of someone who has been expecting this and prepared accordingly, and sat Harry down one evening with all 3 on the low table between them. They were from something called the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, the Office of Underage Sorcery, and one from a Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts School. Harry read them all. Isamu watched him read them. "They want to know where I am," Harry said. "Yes." "Do they know you have me?" "No," Isamu said. "The mountain has certain properties that make it difficult to trace. It is one of the reasons I have lived here for 30 years. Harry set the letters down. He picked up McGonagall's. "This one is different." He tapped it. "The others are bureaucratic. This one is, she's actually worried." Isamu tilted his head slightly, that confirmation expression again. "She knew my parents," Harry said. "It wasn't in the letter. But something about the handwriting, the way the pen pressed harder on certain words, on Harry, on safe, was legible in a way the other letters weren't." "She was their teacher," Isamu confirmed. Harry was quiet for a while. He set the letter down carefully. "I don't want to go back to the Dursleys," he said. It was matter of fact, not plaintive. A statement of terms. "You will not go back to the Dursleys," Isamu said, with the same gravity. "But there's a school. A magical school." Harry looked up. "I should go, eventually." "Yes," Isamu said. "When you are ready. Not before." "How will I know when I'm ready?" Isamu picked up his tea. "You will stop asking me." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then at the letters. Then back at Isamu. "Right back to the worried one," Harry said. "Tell her I'm safe and I'm being educated. You don't have to say where." Isamu raised an eyebrow. "I know it's not the whole story," Harry said. "But it's enough to stop her worrying. She doesn't deserve to be worried." He paused. "The other 2 can wait." Isamu studied him for a long moment with the thorough, unreadable attention that Harry had stopped finding unsettling about 6 months in. "All right," he said. He rose and went to his writing desk. In the end the letter to McGonagall was 7 lines, in Isamu's precise English handwriting, informing her that Harry Potter was in good health, well-fed, and receiving an education, and was in the care of a qualified individual of long experience and good character. It gave no address, no country, and no timeline. McGonagall's reply arrived 4 days later by owl, which was the first owl Harry had seen, and which he received with a composure that impressed Isamu because Harry's composure in that moment was entirely artificial and they both knew it. Harry was riveted by the owl, had to physically restrain himself from following it around the room, but he accepted the letter calmly and read it. "I am glad to hear Harry is safe and cared for," McGonagall had written. "I trust this arrangement is in his best interests and hope you will feel comfortable making contact when circumstances allow. He has a place waiting for him here." She had added, at the bottom, in slightly different ink, as though it had been written at a different time, "Please tell him his mother was one of the finest students I ever taught." Harry read this twice. Then he folded the letter and put it in the cedar chest where he kept the few things that were entirely his, and he went out to the clearing and practiced the fire direction until it was dark and his hands ached and the candle did exactly and only what he intended. The wand came in the autumn of the 2nd year. Isamu produced it on a morning like any other: rice, miso, the mountain in full autumn color, the maples on the lower slope gone a red so saturated it looked like they were lit from inside. He brought it to the table wrapped in plain cloth and set it in front of Harry with the air of someone presenting an item that had been waiting a long time for its correct moment. Harry unwrapped it. It was longer than he'd expected, about 12 inches, and dark, almost black, made from wood so smooth it felt like it had been polished by decades of handling, which it had. The grain ran straight and clean. At one end, barely visible, a carved motif, a wave, or possibly a wing. He couldn't tell, and it was different every time he looked at it. He picked it up. The coal in his chest flared white, then settled into something steady and warm, and the air in the room shifted with a faint resonance like a bell struck and damped before the sound fully emerged. "You," Isamu said. "The tree of death and rebirth in both Eastern and Western tradition. And a phoenix feather at its core, taken with permission, from a bird that gave it willingly, which matters more than you may currently understand." Harry looked at the wand. It felt like an extension of his arm. No, not quite. It felt like an extension of his intent, which was different, which was actually better. "Whose was it?" he asked, because it had clearly belonged to someone. "Mine," Isamu said. "For 40 years. It has been waiting for a second owner since my son," he stopped. "Since I no longer needed it." Harry looked at Isamu. The old man's face was arranged with perfect discipline, but Harry had been living with him for over a year and had learned to read the small things. "I'll take care of it," Harry said. "I know," said Isamu. "Otherwise I would not give it to you." Harry turned the wand over in his hand. He pointed it at the candle on the table, the red practice candle, and he felt his intent clarify in the way it did when everything was right, and the flame appeared on the wick, steady, perfectly sized, going nowhere it wasn't invited. No exploding rocks. No cedar trees. No eyebrows. Isamu made a small sound. Harry looked up. "Was that all right?" Harry asked. "More than all right," Isamu said, and there was something in his voice that Harry hadn't heard before, something that in a less controlled man might have been called emotion. "That was beautiful." The third year, Isamu began teaching Harry Munoma, the space of emptiness, and this was when things got genuinely strange. The practice required Harry to sit absolutely still in the clearing for increasingly long periods. An hour. 2 hours. 4. In the cold. In the rain. Once, memorably, in the middle of a minor snowstorm, which Isamu had not warned him about and which Harry had simply refused to acknowledge until it was over. The point, Isamu said, on a morning when Harry had been sitting in the clearing in the pre-dawn dark for 3 hours and was now simply watching the sky lighten above the cedar trees with the settled patience of someone who had entirely run out of impatience and come out the other side, is not endurance. "I know," Harry said. "The point is what remains when you remove the noise." "I know. Most students argue with me about this for several months before understanding it." "I grew up in a cupboard," Harry said. "I know what it sounds like inside your own head when there's nothing else." Isamu sat down beside him on the flat stone. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the brightening sky. "What do you hear?" he asked. Harry thought about it honestly. "The mountain," he said at last. "Not the sound of it. The shape of it. The age of it. The way it's been here longer than everything and will be here after everything and is not impressed by any of it." Isamu nodded slowly. "And," he said, because he knew there was more. Harry was quiet for a longer time. "Me," he said finally. "Under all the noise. The Dursleys and the lightning bolt and being famous for something I can't remember and the training and the expectations. Under all of it." A pause. "Just me. Just, this. Whatever this is." The sun came over the eastern ridge and hit the raked clearing in gold plains, and for a moment everything was lit from the same angle, Isamu and Harry and the cedar trees and the practice post and the flat stone and the carved wooden markers, and the mountain was very old and very quiet around all of it. "Jizai," said Isamu. "Complete freedom. That is the thing you are learning to find. What do I do with it?" "You will know," Isamu said. "When the time comes, you will know exactly what to do with it, and you will not be afraid." Harry looked at his hands. "I'm not afraid of very much anymore," he said. "I know," said Isamu. "I have been watching. Kodadama came in the 4th year, and it was the strangest and most fundamental thing. Isamu explained it on a still autumn evening over tea, the same way he explained everything, directly, without preamble, as though they were simply continuing a conversation that had always been in progress. The Western tradition teaches that words of power are Latin incantations, sounds that activate predetermined magical effects, he said. Like turning a key in a lock. But? Harry said. But language is not a key. Language is a map. He set down his cup. A map is not the territory. The word fire is not fire. The word pain is not pain. But the true name of a thing, its actual nature, the specific and irreducible truth of what it is, that is not a word in the conventional sense. It is an act of understanding. And understanding, is power, Harry said. Is power, Isamu confirmed. The tradition calls it Kodadama. The spirit of words, or more precisely, the truth within names. If you understand something at its root, you can speak its true name and reality listens. Harry thought about this. What's the true name of fire? Isamu smiled, a real smile, not the small controlled expression that was his usual register. That, he said, is what you spend the year finding out. The year of Kodadama practice was the most intellectually demanding year of Harry's life. It required him to understand things at their base nature, not as concepts, not as labels, but as actual facts of existence. Fire was transformation. Stone was time compressed into form. Water was memory in motion. Light was information, pure and directional. He understood these things, one by one, in the bone-deep way that Isamu meant, and when he spoke them, not in English or Japanese but in something more fundamental, a sound that rose from the chest rather than the throat, things responded. The day he understood darkness, not as the absence of light but as its own presence, the generative space from which everything emerges, he stood in the clearing at midnight and the darkness gathered around him and stood still, attending, and he felt for the first time the specific quality of power that comes not from force but from absolute understanding. Isamu was watching from the veranda. In the dark, Harry couldn't see his expression. Good. Harry called. Come have tea, Isamu said. Harry walked back across the clearing, the darkness moving around him in a way that wasn't threatening, just present, the way the mountain was present. Inside, Isamu poured the tea and sat down and looked at Harry with the thoroughness he always brought to important assessments. You are ready, he said. Harry looked up. For Hogwarts, Isamu said. The word landed differently than Harry had expected. He'd thought about Hogwarts in the abstract for 4 years, a destination, a waypoint on a map he was still reading. Hearing it made it suddenly concrete, a specific real place that real people were at right now while he was here. The letter will come in July, Isamu said. You will turn 11. You will go to Diagon Alley, then to Hogwarts. You will learn their ways and they will learn yours, though they will have the harder job. He picked up his cup. You will not hide. I wasn't planning to, Harry said. I know. I am saying it so you hear my voice when you are tempted. Isamu met his eyes. There will be people who want you smaller. There will be people who are frightened of you. There will be people who want to put you back in a cupboard, metaphorically, and convince you to get in. His voice carried, under the calm, something with considerable weight to it. Do not get in. I won't. And you will write to me. Every week, Harry said, and meant it. Isamu nodded once. He looked out the window at the dark mountain, and his face held something Harry recognized after 4 years as the expression that came when Isamu was thinking of his son, not grief, exactly, not anymore, but the particular quality of love that has survived its object, that keeps its shape even without the thing it was built around. You will be extraordinary, Isamu said. He said it the way you'd say the weather will be cold tomorrow, not as prophecy or pressure. Just as observation. As fact. Harry looked at his tea. He thought about the cupboard. About the night the ceiling light exploded. About the mountain in winter and the shogi board and Tanaka-san's expression the first time he beat her, about the candle lighting cleanly and the stone settling into the gap and Munoma in the pre-dawn cold and darkness gathering at midnight like an obedient tide. I know, he said. The letter arrived the 28th of July. It was delivered by an owl who was either very dramatic or had simply never encountered someone who didn't scramble for the nearest perch to receive it, and who therefore circled the clearing 4 times before Harry held out his arm and let it land, took the letter calmly, and fed it a piece of his breakfast rice cake, which the owl regarded with initial suspicion and then ate. Isamu watched this from the veranda. Hogwarts, Harry said, holding up the green-sealed envelope. Yes. Are you going to tell me it changes everything? Harry turned the envelope over. Mr. H. Potter, The Mountain House, Nagano Prefecture, Japan. He felt a brief, surprised warmth at the precision of that. Wherever you are, the letter would find you. No, said Isamu. It changes nothing. You are what you are. The school will simply be the next place you are at. Harry opened the letter. Read it. Read the list. Thought about a trunk and robes and textbooks and a wand he already had. I'll need to go to London, he said. I will arrange it. You're not coming with me. It wasn't a question. Isamu had been very clear, over 4 years, about the lines of his world. He had not left the mountain in 6 years. He would not leave it for this. The mountain needs tending, Isamu said. The mountain is a mountain, Harry said. Yes, said Isamu, with the faint smile. It does not tend itself. Harry folded the letter. He looked at the clearing, the raked earth, the practice post. The flat stone where he'd spent 100 pre-dawn hours. The cedar trees along the rim, which had stopped catching fire 2 years ago, which now barely trembled when he practiced. He was leaving. He'd known he was leaving. But knowing and the actual morning of it were, he discovered, different. I'll come back, he said. After. In the summers. Yes, said Isamu. You will. Harry looked at him. The old man looked back with the steadiness of 70 years of living and 30 of discipline and 4 of whatever this had been, family, Harry thought, without flinching from the word. That was the word. Whatever shape it came in. Thank you, Harry said. He said it simply, which was the only way that ever worked. Isamu was quiet for a moment. You came to my mountain, he said finally. A 7-year-old boy, alone, at midnight. You made my cedar trees catch fire. You ate all the rice. The faint smile again, carrying things beneath it that neither of them were going to put into words because they didn't need to. I think perhaps you have done me more good than I have done you. Harry didn't argue, because Isamu hated being argued with about things he'd already decided. But he didn't believe it, either. The morning he left, Harry stood in a clearing for the last time and looked at the mountain, the peaks, the forest, the terraces on the opposite slope, and let himself feel the fullness of it. For years. The coal in his chest had become something more refined over those years, less raw heat and more banked warmth, precise and clean and entirely under his direction. He felt it respond to the mountain the way a compass responds to north, a recognition, a relationship. He shouldered his trunk, which was sensibly small, lightly packed, organized in a way that Isamu approved of, and walked down the mountain path toward the village, where a car waited to take him to Nagano Station, and then a train to Tokyo, and then a flight to London. Tanaka-san was at her shogi table outside the tea house as he passed. She looked up and saw him with his trunk and the look on his face, and she made a sound, something between approval and farewell, and called something after him. He understood the dialect well enough now. Come back and beat me again. He smiled over his shoulder without stopping. The path wound down through the rice terraces and into the valley, and Harry walked it steadily in the early morning, and behind him the mountain stood with its usual magnificent indifference, and above it the sky was the specific blue that exists only at high altitude, the blue that means you're close enough to the top of the world to see clearly. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He carried it with him. In a dark stone office in Hogwarts Castle, Albus Dumbledore stood at his desk and read Isamu Kurosawa's letter, the one that had arrived, 2 years ago, 9 months after Harry's disappearance, for what was probably the 40th time. He is well. He is safe. He is learning. He will arrive when it is time. No address. No name signed. A seal he recognized, an old Eastern magical house, one of perhaps 5 families in Japan that practiced the original tradition. He'd thought that line extinct. He set the letter down on his desk beside the instrument that monitored Harry's magical signature, which had been pinging with increasing intensity for 3 years, each ping stronger than the last, each one carrying notes he'd never heard from a British wizard. Complex, layered, dense with something he didn't have a label for. On his desk beside that was a second letter, received this morning, addressed in the same precise hand. He is coming. 2 words. Dumbledore sat down. Fawkes, on his perch, made a low musical sound. I know, Dumbledore said to the Phoenix. I know. He looked out the window at the Scottish morning. The question, he said quietly, is whether we are ready for him. Fawkes tilted his head, regarded him with one bright eye, and said nothing. Chapter 3, The Wrong Kind of Famous. The thing about London was that it was enormous and grey and smelled like exhaust and rain and fried food, and Harry walked through it with his trunk on a small wheeled frame and his hands in his pockets and looked at everything with the patient, cataloguing attention of someone who has spent 4 years learning that observation is the foundation of everything. He'd arranged it all himself. Isamu had wired money to a London account, the details of which Harry did not ask about too closely, because Isamu had a way of having arranged things that made curiosity feel impolite, and Harry had booked the flight from Tokyo, navigated Heathrow with his trunk in his backpack and his yuan in his inside pocket, and taken the tube to Charing Cross Road with a map he'd memorized on the plane. The leaky cauldron was exactly where the letter said it would be, which was satisfying. Harry had half expected it to be difficult to find, some magical concealment that required a specific kind of vision, but he simply walked past the travel agent and the bookshop and there was the pub, shabby and dark-windowed, sitting between its neighbors the way something sits when it has been there long enough that the neighborhood has simply grown around it and accepted its presence as geological fact. He pushed open the door. The pub was dim and smelled like old wood and fireplace smoke and something herby underneath. A dozen or so people in robes of varying degrees of eccentricity sat at tables or stood at the bar, and the conversation dropped by roughly 30% when Harry walked in the way conversation drops when something unexpected enters a room. Harry noticed this, noted it, and walked to the bar. The barman, round-faced, bald, wiping a glass with the automatic motion of a man who has been wiping glasses for decades, looked up and went very still. "Help you," he managed. "I need access to Diagon Alley," Harry said. "I have my Hogwarts letter." The barman's eyes had gone to Harry's forehead. Harry's hair was doing what it always did, growing however it wanted, which was thickly and in several directions, and it covered the scar well enough that you had to be looking for it. The barman was clearly looking for it. The barman started. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "Yes. Access to Diagon Alley, please." He said it the way you'd say double espresso, please, not rude, just direct. He had no particular feelings about his name at this point. It was a name. It referred to him. Beyond that, its power over him was limited. The barman put down the glass. Led Harry through to the back courtyard with an expression caught between reverence and something like personal vindication, as though Harry's existence confirmed a bet he'd had with himself. He took out his wand and tapped the bricks, 3 up, 2 across, and the wall opened. Harry looked at Diagon Alley. It was extraordinary. He had no other word for it. A cobbled street running away under a bright sky, lined with shops of every description, apothecary jars and rainbow banks in one window, owls in stacked cages in another, robes of silk and velvet hanging in a third. People in muggle clothes mixed with people in robes, children dragging adults toward window displays, a witch haggling over something that appeared to be a self-stirring cauldron. It smelled like herbs and old books and candle wax and animal. Harry stood at the entrance and felt the magic in the alley the same way he felt the mountain, as a quality of the air, a density, a weight that wasn't unpleasant. But different from Isamu's mountain. Less ordered. More exuberant. British magic, he thought, had an energy like British weather, unpredictable, enthusiastic, occasionally catastrophic. He stepped in. Gringotts was first, because money was practical and everything else could follow from it. The bank was exactly as startling as it should have been, enormous white building, the brass doors, the inner silver doors, the goblins. Harry had read enough to know about goblins and had formed no particular prejudgments, which seemed to be the right approach because the goblin at the main desk processed his vault access with professional efficiency the moment Harry set the Gringotts key on the counter and said, in serviceable gobbledygook, which he'd worked through a textbook of over the previous month, Crag Thuk Nas Velk, which meant approximately I wish to access my family vault. The goblin stopped. Looked up. Examined Harry with sudden alertness. You speak gobbledygook, it said, in English, with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read. Approximately, Harry said. My grammar is probably imperfect. Your grammar is better than most adults who attempt it, the goblin said. It sounded more suspicious than complimentary. Your key. Already on the counter, Harry said. The goblin looked at the key. Looked at Harry. Made a notation. Griphook will take you to Vault 687, it said. And to the secondary vault, per the additional instructions. Additional instructions? Harry said. Left by Lily and James Potter at the time of their death, the goblin said, with the absolute neutrality of someone for whom death is primarily a filing category. To be accessed when the heir presented himself. You are the heir. You have presented yourself. It made another notation. Follow Griphook. Griphook was narrow-faced and efficient and led Harry to the cart with the air of someone who had very little patience for anything. Harry liked him immediately. He liked people who were direct. The vault was full of gold, more gold than Harry had a reference point for, golden coins piled in drifts, and he spent 30 seconds looking at it and took what he needed for the year and moved on. The secondary vault was smaller. More interesting. Inside, on a low stone shelf, sat a sealed letter, a ring with a family crest, a stag and a doe, which Harry turned over in his hands for a moment before pocketing it, and a long flat box that contained, when opened, a cloak the color of liquid shadow. He touched it and it ran through his fingers like water and his hand disappeared. He looked at where his hand had been. Looked at where it reappeared when he pulled the cloak back. Invisibility. He folded the cloak with care and put it in his bag. Picked up the sealed letter. Read it later, he decided, it deserved more space than a Gringotts cart. He pocketed it and nodded to Griphook. Thank you. Griphook made the sound goblins apparently made when they were marginally impressed and wouldn't admit it, and took him back to the surface. He moved through the alley with purpose, Madame Malkin's for robes, the apothecary for supplies, Flourish and Blots where he already had most of the books and added several that weren't on the list because they looked interesting and he was constitutionally incapable of being in a bookshop and leaving empty-handed. He was at the back of Flourish and Blots, examining a Japanese magical history text that had no business being in a London shop but was there anyway, when he heard the voice. That one's rubbish, actually. My father says the author has very confused ideas about Eastern magical tradition. Harry turned around. The boy was his age, pale and blond with sharp features, dressed in robes that were clearly new and expensive and which he wore with the comfortable ease of someone who had never worn anything else. He had light gray eyes and an expression of evaluative intelligence that Harry recognized, the look of someone who was always measuring the room, always running calculations, always deciding where the leverage was. Your father has read it? Harry said. A slight pause. The boy had been expecting a different reaction, deference, probably, or the defensive fluster of someone caught looking at the wrong book by someone who knows better. He has access to much better sources, the boy said. That's not the same as having read it. Harry turned back to the book. The author's confused about Kodai Meho, specifically. But his section on the Heian period magical courts is quite good. Another pause. Longer this time. You know about Kodai Meho? The boy's voice carried genuine surprise under the careful social register. Enough, Harry said. He put the book back and picked up the one next to it. I'm Draco Malfoy, the boy said, as though the name were a credential being presented for inspection. Harry looked at him. Processed the name. He'd done enough reading on the British wizarding world to know the major houses, and Malfoy was prominent among them. Old money, old blood, old allegiances. The kind of family where children learned the score before they could ride a broom. Harry Potter, he said. Draco Malfoy went absolutely still. Harry watched this happen with interest. It was different from the barman's reaction, less reverential, more calculating. The grey eyes went quickly to his forehead, then back to his face, and in that brief scan Harry saw the whole machinery of Draco Malfoy's mind shift into a different gear. You've been missing, Draco said. Careful now. Precise. Traveling, Harry said. For 4 years. I travel slowly. Draco looked at him for a moment. My father will want to meet you. I'm sure he will, Harry said pleasantly. He closed the book. I'll see you at Hogwarts, Malfoy. He moved toward the front of the shop. Potter. Draco's voice behind him was controlled and thoughtful and not at all what Harry had expected, which was the first mark in the boy's favor. He turned. Draco had his head slightly tilted, that calculating look running at full speed. What was the Eastern training like? Harry looked at him. Long, he said. And very good. He held Draco's gaze for a moment. You're smarter than you're letting on. Draco blinked. A crack in the composure, quickly repaired. So are you, he said. Harry smiled, which was not something he'd been doing much of since getting off the plane because the alley was overwhelming and he was still calibrating, but the smile was genuine. He turned back to the door. He didn't file Draco Malfoy under enemy. He filed him under interesting and watch carefully, which were more useful categories. Ollivander's was last. Harry had the wand, so technically he didn't need the shop. But he'd read enough about the British magical tradition to know that using a wand unregistered with Ollivander's would raise questions he didn't want to deal with, and he was also, honestly, curious. Garrick Ollivander was, by any historical measure, a genius, and Harry had spent 4 years around genius and knew how to recognize it and how to talk to it. He pushed open the door. The bell above it made its quiet sound. The shop was dusty and narrow and full of wand boxes stacked floor to ceiling, and it smelled like wood shavings and something else, old and specific, that Harry recognized as the particular smell of concentrated magical objects that had been in close proximity for a very long time. Like the cedar chest at home. Like the shelf of objects in Isamu's kitchen. Ollivander appeared from between the stacks in the way that suggested he'd been there the entire time and had simply chosen this moment to become visible. He was ancient, white eyes, thin as paper, moving with the careful precision of extreme age and perfect intention. He looked at Harry for a long moment. Mr. Potter, he said. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. I expected you 4 years ago, Ollivander said. When the age presented itself and the name failed to appear. He moved closer, examining Harry with those white eyes in a way that was less personal than technical, the way Isamu looked at a piece of wood he was considering working with. You feel different. I expect I do, Harry said. Extend your wand hand. It was automatic, a habit of years. Harry took out his wand and held it flat on his palm instead. Ollivander went very still. You, he said. 12 inches. He looked up. Phoenix feather core. He looked at the wand the way Harry had seen Isamu look at it when he'd given it to him, with recognition, with a history attached. I know this wand. It was Isamu Kurosawa's, Harry said. I sold it, Ollivander said. He said it quietly. 43 years ago. To a young man from Nagano who came to London for reasons of, he stopped. Reassembled himself. I sold it to him. It should not have been transferable. He gave it freely, Harry said. With intent. Ollivander looked at the wand. He reached out one thin finger and touched it, the lightest contact, and the wand sent a brief warm resonance up Harry's arm like a pulse. It has changed, Ollivander said. It knows you. Yes, Harry said. You don't need me to sell you a wand. The white eyes moved back to his face. Why are you here? Honesty, Harry said. I'll be using this wand at Hogwarts. I thought you should know it exists and who carries it, rather than having you find out another way and form the wrong impression. Ollivander looked at him for a long, still moment. And you have registered it with the Ministry? I'm here first, Harry said. I thought the man who made the wand records deserved more courtesy than a government form. Something happened in Ollivander's face. Not quite a smile, more like a recalibration. Your wand, he said to Harry, with emphasis, the possessive pronoun carrying formal magical weight, which Harry knew and had chosen the right place to receive. Has the distinction of being the brother wand to one other in existence. He moved to a section of boxes toward the back and touched one without removing it, lightly, as though confirming its presence. 13.5 inches. Phoenix feather. The other feather from the same bird. He looked back at Harry. That wand gave Tom Riddle his second name. You know who. I know who, Harry said. Both from the same phoenix, Ollivander said. I have wondered, for 10 years, what it would mean when you came to me. Does it change your assessment of the wand? Harry asked. No, Ollivander said. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. Or in your case, the wand recognizes the wizard who was chosen by someone else. Which is rarer? He paused. And perhaps more significant. Harry looked at his wand. He thought of Isamu handing it across the low table, the autumn light through the shoji screen. It has been waiting for a second owner. Register it, Ollivander said. The form is a formality, but the Ministry will sleep better. I'll do it on the way out of the alley, Harry said. He pocketed the wand. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. Mr. Potter. The old man watched him move toward the door with those white eyes. Curious. I've been saying that for 50 years about the wands that come through here. First time I've said it about the wizard. Harry pushed open the door. The bell rang softly. Outside, the alley had gone golden in the afternoon light, and the crowds had thinned toward evening, and the cobblestones caught the light and bounced it warmly back, and Harry stood for a moment on the step and breathed it all in, the herbs and candle wax and old books and the warm animal smell from the owl shop, and felt the coal in his chest respond to it, this new place, this new layer of magic that was nothing like the mountain but was no less real. He was a part of this world. He hadn't been, for a long time. Or rather, it hadn't been a part of him, not in any active sense, it had been a category he was assigned to but excluded from, the name in the book without an address, the famous boy who was somewhere impossible and coming back eventually. He was back. He bought an owl on the way out, a tawny female with amber eyes and a self-possessed quality he respected, and named her Hannah on the spot, which meant flower, which was slightly ironic given that she looked about as delicate as a small boulder. He posted a letter to Isamu from the owl post before he left the alley. I've arrived. The alley is extraordinary. I've met my first Malfoy, more interesting than advertised. Ollivander knew your wand. Hannah will carry this, she is an owl of formidable dignity and I think you would like her. I'll write from Hogwarts. Harry he stepped back through the leaky cauldron and out onto Charing Cross Road, and London received him back with its usual magnificent indifference, and he found a cheap hotel 2 streets away and ate curry for dinner and read his parents' letter in the quiet room. The letter was in 2 hands, James Potter's writing looped and quick, Lily's precise and warm, and they'd clearly written it together, interrupting each other, finishing each other's sentences, which was visible in the structure of the thing even across 11 years. It began "Dear Harry," and it was the first time anyone had put those two words together and sent them to him, and he sat with that for a moment before continuing. It told him things. Practical things first, the accounts, the ring, the cloak, which had been James's father's and his father's before that. It told him the cloak was not ordinary invisibility cloak magic but something older and the ministry didn't need to know. It told him about the cottage in Godric's Hollow and said he was welcome to it when he was old enough and wanted it. Then the tone changed. "We don't know what shape your life is taking as you read this," his mother had written. "We don't know what's happened or what you've had to carry. But we want you to know, we would have chosen you. Whatever you've become. However you've had to grow. We would have chosen every version of you without hesitation. Your father wants me to add, also the cloak is excellent for sneaking and please use it wisely, and if Dumbledore ever asks just play dumb. We love you," his mother had written, in the final line. "We loved you before you were born and we loved you every second after, and love doesn't stop being true just because it was not finished." The letter ended there, in the middle of the sentence, and Harry sat with the incomplete thing in his hands for a while. Then he folded it carefully, put it with the other letter, McGonagall's, in the cedar box he traveled with, set the box in his trunk, and went to sleep. He did not cry. He had done his crying on the mountain, 4 years ago, on the first night, and what came now was not sadness exactly, it was something fuller than that, something that held grief and gratitude and love and loss in the same space without contradiction, the way Munoma held silence and fullness simultaneously. He carried them, James and Lily, the way he carried Isamu and the mountain and Tanaka-san's shogi board and the cedar trees and the pre-dawn cold. He carried all of it. That was what you did with the things that mattered. King's Cross on the 1st of September was a specific kind of beautiful chaos. Harry arrived an hour early, Isamu's influence, the deep-seated instinct to know any space before the action started, and walked the station with his trunk on the trolley and Hannah on top complaining quietly about the noise, and found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and stood beside it and watched families arrive. He was watching for the wall. He'd read about platform 9 3/4. Isamu's library had contained a surprisingly detailed guide to British wizarding infrastructure, which was either foresight or hoarding and possibly both, but reading about a magical barrier and walking through one were experientially different, and Harry wanted to observe it first. The Weasleys arrived like weather. There was no other word for it. A woman with vivid red hair and the kind of voice that carries across large spaces without apparent effort, trailing 5 children who ranged from about 16 to 11, all with the same red hair, all with the same slightly battered look of people who own a great many things that are all in active use at once. The youngest boy was Harry's age, freckled, tall, with an easy lopsided expression that suggested he found most things broadly amusing. Harry watched them locate the barrier and disappear through it in a cheerful procession. He waited 30 seconds to see if anyone reacted. Nobody did. He walked through the wall. Platform 9 3/4 was red steam and noise and owls and cats and the particular social energy of a few hundred children transitioning between one world and another. The Hogwarts Express stood alongside the platform in crimson confidence, enormous and beautiful in the specific way that beautiful old machines are beautiful. Harry stood for a moment and looked at it and felt the coal in his chest do the warm thing. He loaded his trunk, settled Hannah's cage, and found a compartment near the back, empty, window side, and sat down and watched the platform. He was watching Draco Malfoy greet 3 other boys with the specific social energy of a young general arriving at a planning meeting when the compartment door opened and a red-haired boy looked in. "Everywhere else is full," the boy said. "Can I sit here?" "Yes," Harry said. He shifted Hannah's cage to make room. The boy dropped into the seat across from him with the loose-limbed ease of someone born comfortable in most rooms. He had a pet rat in his robe pocket and a smear of something on his nose and the unhurried quality of someone who was exactly as straightforward as he appeared, which Harry found immediately refreshing after Draco Malfoy. "I'm Ron Weasley," the boy said. "Harry Potter." Ron Weasley blinked. Looked at Harry's forehead. Harry's hair was doing its thing. Ron craned his neck slightly and then, to his enormous credit, leaned back and said, "Right. Yeah. So, have you really been in Japan for 4 years?" "Yes," Harry said. "That's brilliant," Ron said, with uncomplicated enthusiasm. "My brother Charlie wants to go to China for the dragons." "Did you see any dragons?" "Not in Japan," Harry said. "But there are Ryu, similar but different. Eastern dragons tend to be more what?" "Philosophical," Harry said. Ron stared at him for a moment. Then he burst out laughing, a proper laugh, unguarded and genuine, and Harry found himself smiling, and the train began to move. They talked for the better part of an hour. About dragons and Quidditch and the Weasley family, which was apparently large and warm and chaotic in ways Ron described with the comfortable, slightly martyred affection of someone embedded in a family that drives them mad and whom they would die for. He had 5 brothers and a sister and his parents were brilliant, Ron said, but they worry a lot, Mum especially. She sends these letters that are basically just worry pressed flat and sealed, you know. Harry nodded like he knew. He thought of McGonagall's letter. Ron talked about Hogwarts. He'd grown up with it as a constant presence, houses and teachers and Quidditch cups and the specific legends that accumulated around any institution old enough to have several generations of families passing through. He mentioned Dumbledore with the particular tone people used when they meant genius but complicated, and then looked at Harry with sudden attention. "Do you know Dumbledore?" he asked. "Not personally," Harry said. "He kept trying to find you," Ron said. "Everyone knows that. For years and he couldn't." He cocked his head. "How do you hide from Dumbledore?" "Mountain," Harry said. "What?" "My mentor's mountain has properties that make it difficult to trace," Harry said. "Dumbledore is very powerful by British standards. But there are older forms of concealment than anything developed in the last 500 years. Ron absorbed this. "Your mentor," he said. "The Japanese wizard. Isamu Kurosawa. What was he like?" Harry thought about this honestly. "Like a mountain himself," he said. "Patient and old and very difficult to move. And completely indifferent to how difficult he was being." He paused. "He made the best tea I've ever had." "My mum makes excellent tea," Ron offered. "I'll have to try it." Ron grinned at him. "Yeah," he said, "you will." And he said it with the casual certainty of someone for whom the future is obviously going to involve this person in their kitchen, and Harry found the certainty entirely comfortable rather than presumptuous. This was how they were sitting, easy, warm, the landscape running past the window and Hannah asleep on her perch, when the compartment door opened again and a girl with brown bushy hair and an expression of focused assessment looked in. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." She looked at Harry, looked at Ron, looked at Hannah's cage and Ron's rat, and then her eyes snapped back to Harry's forehead with a focus that suggested she'd clocked it from the doorway. "You're Harry Potter," she said, not as a question. "He is," Ron confirmed, gesturing with a pasty. "I've read about you," she said. "There's very little in the standard texts because you've been missing, but I found references in great wizarding events of the 20th century and some mentions in notable historical magical disappearances which I thought was a bit morbid but informative." "I wasn't dead," Harry said. "Obviously," she said, not missing a beat. "I also found a reference to Eastern magical traditions in the philosophy of modern magic which mentioned the Kodai Meiho school, and if you were being trained in that then theoretically you would have a completely different approach to fundamental magical mechanics than Hermione Granger," she said, apparently remembering herself, and stuck out her hand. Harry shook it. "You've done your research." "I always do my research," she said. "I'll go look for Neville's toad." She left. Ron looked at Harry. "She's like that," he said. "Apparently." "I like her," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said, looking at the closed door with mild surprise, as though he'd been expecting a different response. "Actually, yeah." Neville Longbottom arrived 20 minutes later, toadless but resigned to it, with the particular body language of someone who has made peace with being the kind of person things go wrong for. He was round-faced and nervous and dropped into the seat next to Ron with an apologetic air that seemed to be his default setting. Harry watched him for a moment. He'd had enough experience of people who were frightened of their own nature, who had been told, one way or another, that they were less than they were, to recognize it when he saw it. Neville Longbottom had good eyes. Observant, honest, with more there than his posture suggested. He was holding himself small, and it was clearly a practiced thing, the way Harry had once practiced being ordinary. "The toad will turn up," Harry said to him directly. Neville looked at him. "I always lose him," he said. "I'm not even sure I like him, honestly. My gran gave him to me and I didn't feel like I could say I didn't want a toad." "What would you have wanted?" Harry asked. A pause. "An owl," Neville said, slightly surprised by the question. "Like yours." "She's beautiful." "She's opinionated," Harry said. Hannah opened one eye as if to confirm this. "But yes. You should tell your gran about the owl. If she gave you a toad, she was trying to give you something you'd connect with. She just got the wrong animal." Neville looked at him. Something in the boy's face shifted, not dramatically, not a transformation, just a small internal adjustment, the kind that happens when someone treats you as though your opinion about your own life is relevant. "That's," Neville started. "Yeah. That's probably true." Ron was looking at Harry with an expression Harry was starting to recognize, slightly amazed, not in a worshipping way but in the way of someone watching a thing be done well and thinking, "Oh, so that's how you do it." "Where are you from?" Neville asked Harry. "Surrey, originally," Harry said. "Most recently Japan." Neville stared. "Japan? Like, actually Japan?" "It's a real place," Harry said. Neville laughed, an honest, startled laugh, and the tension around him dropped by several degrees, and Ron passed the pasties around and Hermione came back without the toad but with the information that it was in a compartment 3 down, and Neville went to retrieve it and came back a few minutes later looking marginally more settled. The 4 of them sat in the compartment as the light changed and the landscape went from suburban to rural to properly wild, mountains coming up dark blue on the horizon, and Harry watched the country roll past and felt something he didn't entirely have language for, a sense of being, finally, in the right current. Draco Malfoy appeared at the door when they were perhaps an hour from Hogwarts. He had 2 large boys flanking him who were clearly in the role of blunt social instruments, and he looked into the compartment with those calculating grey eyes and did the room assessment in a single pass: Ron's shabby robes, Hermione's muggle background legible in her hairband, Neville's nervous posture, and then landed on Harry. "Potter," he said. "You'll want different company for your first arrival." He said it with the smooth confidence of someone who has never been told no by anyone he considered important. Harry noted the qualifier. "I'm fine where I am," Harry said pleasantly. "These are," Draco glanced at Ron. "Weasleys don't have a lot of influence at Hogwarts." "I'm not interested in influence," Harry said. Draco blinked. Another crack. He was recalibrating again, running through options, choosing the next angle. "Your mentor," Draco said. "Kurosawa. My father knows of him." "Your father knows of a lot of people," Harry said. "It doesn't make them answerable to him." A silence. The 2 large boys shifted with the specific discomfort of blunt instruments who've been brought to a conversation where force isn't applicable. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. He said it without the performance this time, direct, almost despite himself. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not what anyone expected." He held Draco's gaze without aggression, without backing down, simply level. "The invitation stands for what I said in the bookshop. I'll see you at Hogwarts." Another pause. Then Draco turned and left, the 2 large boys following. Hermione watched him go with an expression that suggested she had immediately filed him under several unflattering categories. Ron was eating a chocolate frog and looked satisfied. Neville had his toad, apparently named Trevor, in his lap and was watching Harry with frank curiosity. "He's not going to give up," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed. "He's persistent. But he's not stupid. He'll recalibrate." He picked up the chocolate frog Ron had offered him, examined the card, Dumbledore, with those half-moon glasses and a beard like a silver avalanche, and turned it over. "He'll figure out there are better approaches." "To what?" Ron said. "To whatever he's actually trying to accomplish," Harry said. "He didn't come here to be rude. He came here to make an alliance and got the approach wrong." He pocketed the card. "Give him some time." Ron stared at him. "You're very, I don't know. Calm about that." "I've had a lot of practice," Harry said. The train went on into the darkening evening, and the mountains grew closer and the stars came out and the four of them settled into the easy warmth of a compartment where something real had begun, and Hannah watched everything with her amber eyes and Trevor made his feelings known about the situation in the general way of toads, which was to say not positively but consistently. When the lights of Hogsmeade came up through the darkness, Harry stood at the window and looked at them, the village, the lake, and above it all, enormous and lit against the night sky, a castle that sat on its rock with the absolute authority of something that has been there a very long time and intends to be there a very long time more. He felt the magic of it from the window. Old, layered, dense with history and intent and the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of young people discovering what they were made of. He pressed his hand briefly to the glass. "Hello," he said quietly, and he wasn't sure whether he was talking to the castle or to the version of himself that had been waiting in this version of the world for 4 years. Either way, something ancient and enormous seemed to hear it. Behind him, Ron said, "We should get our robes on," and Harry turned from the window and did, and when the train pulled into Hogsmeade Station and the doors opened and the cold night air came flooding in, he stepped out into it without hesitation. Ready. Completely and entirely ready. The castle waited on its rock. Harry walked toward it. Chapter 4, 11 and unafraid. The boats were Hagrid's domain, and Hagrid was extraordinary. Harry had heard the name, it appeared in various accounts of the night his parents died, the enormous man who had carried baby Harry from the wreckage of Godric's Hollow and delivered him to Dumbledore on a flying motorcycle. He'd imagined something large. He had not adequately imagined this, a man the size of a small building, with a beard like a brown hedge and hands like dustbin lids, who nevertheless moved through the crowd of first years with a gentleness so practiced it had become instinct, organizing them into boats with the careful precision of someone who has done this many times and never lost anyone and intends to keep it that way. "For to a boat," Hagrid called, his voice carrying easily over the general first-year noise of excited chaos. "No more N4, yeah, I see yeah, Don, try and squeeze 5 in, the boat knows." Harry climbed into a boat with Ron, Hermione, and Neville, and the boats moved out onto the lake without being rowed, pulled by something below the surface that Harry felt rather than saw, a long, slow intelligence, old as the castle, perfectly content in its dark water. The castle came around the headland and there were the requisite sounds, gasps, someone saying "oh" in a voice entirely stripped of self-consciousness, and Harry watched it come and felt the castle's magic press against the coal in his chest in a specific way, a kind of mutual recognition. "It's testing us," he said quietly. "What?" Hermione looked at him. "The castle. It's reading us, as we come in. Feeling what we carry." He watched the towers come up against the star-scattered sky. "Old places do that." She looked at the castle, then at him. "That's not in any of the books I read." "It wouldn't be," he said. "It's not the kind of thing you can put in a book. You have to feel it." Ron leaned over and looked at the water with new wariness. "The giant squid feels us too." "The giant squid," Harry said, "seems like it has better things to worry about." Ron looked reassured. Neville looked at the water and then deliberately looked at the castle instead. The boats touched the underground harbor and Hagrid led them up through passages and stairs and into the warmth and candlelight of the castle, and Harry walked through it all cataloguing everything, the portraits that moved, the suits of armor that breathed, the ghosts that drifted through walls with the self-possessed ease of those who have had centuries to get comfortable with their situation. The magic was everywhere, layered and dense, British in its particular exuberant way, not precise, not surgical, more like a garden than a forest. Alive, intentional, slightly unruly. He liked it. Professor McGonagall was waiting for them in a stone antechamber off the Great Hall, and she was exactly what the handwriting had promised, tall, precise, dressed in tartan with her hair pinned back, carrying herself with the authority of someone who has managed hundreds of 11-year-olds for decades and maintains zero illusions about what 11-year-olds are. She looked at the assembled first years with a comprehensive scan that took about 3 seconds and appeared to capture everything relevant. Then her gaze landed on Harry. She went still for one beat. 1. Then she was herself again, composed, continuing the scan, but that one beat was enough. Harry filed it carefully. She gave her speech about houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, in the measured cadence of something delivered many times but not without conviction. Harry listened with attention. He'd read about the houses. He had his own thoughts about where he'd end up, and about what that would mean. When she left them to wait, the first years immediately erupted into nervous conversation. Ron muttered something about the sorting being a trial of some kind, and Harry didn't correct him because it wasn't his job to manage everyone's pre-existing theories, and also the nervousness of other people was their own business. Hermione was doing something with her hands that wasn't quite wringing them, more like rehearsing wand movements, a displaced anxiety response. Neville looked at the floor with the expression of someone preparing for bad news. One of the other boys, a slight, dark-haired boy Harry vaguely recognized from the train, was holding it together with visible effort. Harry had noted him earlier, the way you note something that's slightly out of alignment. There was something about the boy, Zabini, he thought, Blaise Zabini, that sat interestingly between the Malfoy camp and everywhere else. Watching rather than performing. Harry recognized the posture. The ghosts came through the wall then, several of them, in a conversation that had clearly been running for some time, and the first years scattered and regrouped, and then McGonagall was back and it was time. The Great Hall was a physical fact. Harry had walked into rooms with enormous magical weight before, the shrine at the mountain summit that Isamu took him to once a year, the old library in Nagano City where the magical texts were kept behind layered concealment. He'd stood in places of genuine power and felt the specific gravity of them. This was different. Not more powerful, different in kind, the way a symphony orchestra is different from a solo instrument. The enchanted ceiling was doing its job, stars above, cold clear September sky, but it was more than that. Hundreds of students, hundreds of wands, centuries of accumulated intention and memory and magic worked here daily. The castle didn't just contain magic. It was saturated with it, through the stone, through the mortar, through every carving and candelabra and worn step. Harry walked in with the other first years and felt everything briefly, comprehensively, then filed it into background. Not because it wasn't impressive. Because being stunned was a choice and he had things to pay attention to. For long house tables. Staff table at the far end. A battered old hat on a stool at the front. The hat sang. Harry listened. The song was, in addition to being an impressive piece of magical self-expression, quite a sophisticated piece of intelligence gathering. The verses about the houses were also probes, resonances sent out to read the students listening. He felt it touch him and he met it with a light, non-aggressive acknowledgement that made the hat pause mid-verse for precisely half a second before continuing. Then the names started. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. Brown, Lavender, Gryffindor. Harry watched and listened. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin before the hat had touched his head, which told Harry everything he needed to know about how settled Draco's sense of himself was. He'd been walking toward that table his entire life. He sat down with the satisfaction of someone claiming what was always going to be theirs. Granger, Hermione. The hat spent about 4 seconds on Hermione's head before calling Gryffindor, and Harry saw the brief flash of something on her face. The hat had clearly offered her a choice, and Hermione being Hermione had probably thought about it for all 4 seconds before deciding with characteristic decisiveness. She went to the Gryffindor table with her chin up and was welcomed by the existing students with enthusiasm. Longbottom, Neville, the hat took almost a minute on Neville. Whatever the hat was saying, Neville sat very still under it with his eyes closed, and his hands, resting on his knees, slowly unclenched. When the hat called Gryffindor there was a brief confused expression on Neville's face, not unhappiness, more like finding a door open that you'd been prepared to find locked. Harry made a note of it. Malfoy, Draco, Slytherin, as noted. Potter, Harry. The Great Hall did what Harry had expected it would do, which was produce a sudden cascading silence as approximately 500 people all stopped talking at the same moment. A ripple of whispers. Harry walked forward with the same pace he'd been using all evening. He sat on the stool. He let McGonagall lower the hat over his head and sat in the brief darkness of old felt and waited. The hat's voice in his head was like a presence, not threatening, not comforting, simply there, attentive, probing. Well, the hat said. This is different. I would imagine so, Harry thought back. 4 years of Eastern training. Isamu Kurosawa's student. The hat seemed to be making adjustments. That's quite unusual. I'm told that, Harry thought. Let's see. Courage, considerable. More than that. Genuine absence of fear, which is not the same as courage. Courage requires fear as a substrate. You've gone beyond courage into something else. A pause. Gryffindor would call it courage anyway. They're not wrong, just imprecise. What do you call it? I call it rare, the hat said. Intelligence, yes, obvious. Loyalty, deep and specific. You don't give it easily, but when you give it, it holds. Ambition, interesting. Not for status. For mastery. For understanding. That's Slytherin's best quality without Slytherin's typical distortions. And you already know where you belong, the hat said. Don't you? Harry thought about it honestly. The mountain. The clearing. The pre-dawn darkness and what he found in it. Yes, he said. Then let's not waste each other's time, the hat said, with something that sounded almost like amusement. And called, loudly, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. The twins, Fred and George Weasley, Harry would learn, though in this moment they were simply 2 identical red-haired individuals with identical expressions of enthusiastic chaos, started a chant that McGonagall suppressed with a look. Percy Weasley, prefect badge gleaming, shook Harry's hand with serious formality. Hermione moved down to make room with a smile that said she'd expected this. Ron arrived shortly after, sorted to Gryffindor in a way that seemed to personally relieve him of some significant anxiety, and dropped into the seat next to Harry with a whoosh of expelled breath. Right, Ron said. That's done. Did the hat say anything interesting? Harry asked. It said I had a lot to live up to with 5 brothers and then called Gryffindor, which felt like being told you're adequate, Ron said. What about you? You were under it for ages. For seconds, Harry said. Felt like ages, Ron said. Neville arrived at Gryffindor and sat across from Harry and looked immediately better for having a house at all, like a coat had been handed to him in cold weather. He was someone who needed belonging before he could begin to be himself, and Harry found he already knew this about Neville from roughly 40 minutes of acquaintance, which said something about how clearly visible Neville's inner workings were if you bothered to look. The food appeared, which caused Ron to forget everything else for a while, which Harry found completely understandable because the food was extraordinary, the kind of meal that announces itself as a fact, not an offering. Dumbledore's start-of-term speech was brief and strange and warm. He had the quality of someone who could fill a room simply by standing in it, not authority exactly, more like gravity. Every person in the Great Hall tilted slightly in his direction without appearing to notice they were doing it. Harry watched him the way he watched everything, patient, comprehensive, storing. Dumbledore's eyes found him at some point during the welcoming address. Harry had expected this. He met the gaze directly, without challenge, without deference, with the same level attention he gave everything. Dumbledore held it for 2 seconds and then moved on, and in those 2 seconds Harry learned something. The old man was genuinely, carefully trying to assess what he was looking at, which meant he didn't already know, which meant 4 years in Nagano had produced something the headmaster of Hogwarts couldn't read on sight. Good, Harry thought. Not from pride. From practicality. Being readable made you manageable. He had no interest in being managed. After the feast, Percy led the Gryffindors up through the castle, staircases that moved, a password Harry memorized instantly, Caput Draconis, and into the Gryffindor common room, which was all fireplaces and red velvet and the accumulated comfortable disorder of a place that is lived in by people who actually live in it. Harry stood in the common room and looked at it for a moment. Hermione appeared beside him. The dormitories are up those stairs, apparently. Apparently, Harry agreed. The hat spoke to you, she said quietly. Not quite a question. It does that, Harry said. It spoke to you too. It offered me Ravenclaw, she said. She sounded matter-of-fact about it, but there was a layer underneath. She'd clearly been thinking about it since the hat lifted. But you wanted Gryffindor, Harry said. I wanted, she stopped. I wanted to be somewhere I'd have to be brave. Not just somewhere I'd be comfortable. She looked at the fireplace. Is that strange? It's the most sensible thing I've heard anyone say tonight, Harry said. And I've heard a lot of things. She looked at him with the focused, evaluative attention that was clearly her baseline mode and which Harry liked enormously. It was honest, it didn't pretend to feel things it didn't feel or hide things it did. You're not what I expected either, she said. Everyone says that. It must get tiring. Less tiring than being what they expected would have been, Harry said. She smiled, a real one, not the polished social version, and went to find her dormitory. The first week of Hogwarts established several things. Harry's approach to classes was not the approach of someone encountering magic for the first time, which created an immediate and somewhat complicated dynamic with the teaching staff. Professor Flitwick's first charms class involved the students attempting to make a feather levitate. The incantation was Wingardium Leviosa. Flitwick demonstrated, the class attempted, the results ranged from nothing to enthusiastic failure to Hermione's clean execution with her wrist making the specific motion she'd clearly been practicing. Harry held his wand and looked at the feather. He understood levitation in the Kinonagare framework, motion without contact, directed intent, the understanding that the feather wanted to move in the direction of the force applied. He directed his intent at it in the way he'd been doing for 3 years and lifted it, smoothly, to about 2 feet above the desk. Then, because this was a class and not a demonstration, he held it there and looked at the incantation on the board and focused on the relationship between the Latin words and the magical effect they were supposed to produce, and worked backward from the result to understand the mechanism the Western tradition was using. Flitwick noticed him in the 3rd minute and made a sound like a very small steam kettle. Mr. Potter, he said, from beside Harry's desk, his voice about a quarter of its usual register. Harry looked at him. The feather stayed where it was. You are already performing the charm, Flitwick said. I'm performing something similar, Harry said. I'm trying to understand whether the incantation adds to the effect or primarily serves as a focusing mechanism. Flitwick stared at the feather. At Harry. At the feather. Both, he said faintly. For most practitioners, primarily the latter, but for advanced, he stopped himself. Perhaps we should discuss this after class. I'd like that, Harry said. Yes, said Flitwick, who looked like a man trying to recalibrate a lesson plan he'd used for 30 years. Yes, I imagine we would. Across the table, Ron's feather had achieved a kind of troubled vibration. He looked at Harry's calmly floating feather and said, Can you just tell me if the wrist thing actually matters? Less than you think, Harry said. Try understanding what you want it to do rather than telling it. Ron tried. The feather lurched upward, hovered for 3 unstable seconds, and then came down. Better, Harry said. Better? Ron said. It moved. It fell. It fell from higher up than before, Harry said. That's progress. Ron gave him a look of magnificent skepticism and tried again. Potions was Professor Snape, and Professor Snape was an event. He swept in as the Gryffindors and Slytherins settled, black robes doing the thing they clearly did habitually, and stood at the front of the dungeon classroom in the particular silence of someone who has calculated exactly how long a silence needs to be to achieve maximum effect. Then he took the register. He paused at Harry's name. A pause with architecture. Ah, he said. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. Harry looked at him. Snape's eyes were black and flat and intelligent, and the intelligence had a specific quality, the kind that has been held as a weapon for so long it no longer knew how to be anything else. Sir, Harry said, neutrally. Snape held his gaze for a moment. Then moved on. The questions began, famous opening Snape gambit. Harry had been warned by older Gryffindors on the staircase the previous evening. He asked about the Bezoar. He asked about Monkshood and Wolfsbane. He called on Harry for the second one. They're the same plant, Harry said. Aconitum. Extremely toxic in its raw form. Useful in potions for fever reduction and pain management in controlled dilutions. He paused. The preparation method determines whether it heals or kills. Snape looked at him. The class was very quiet. The Bezoar, Snape said, redirecting without acknowledging. Goat stomach. Antidote to most poisons. Effective because the calcified salts bind with common toxic compounds and neutralize them before gastric absorption. Another pause. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, with the tone of someone doing something against their better judgment. He turned to the class. That Mr. Potter seems to have memorized the first chapter of the textbook does not excuse the rest of you from, it's not the textbook, Harry said. Snape turned back slowly. I haven't used the textbook, Harry said. My mentor's library had different sources. Better ones, for the most part. The Hogwarts potions texts are functional but the theoretical framework is quite shallow. He said this completely without provocation, just as a statement of fact, and then appeared to register the silence that had fallen over the dungeon and added, only slightly less directly, the practical instructions are excellent, though. Draco Malfoy, from the Slytherin side, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Snape looked at Harry for a long, flat moment. Indeed, he said. Perhaps Mr. Potter would like to demonstrate his superior theoretical framework during the practical portion of today's class. Happy to, Harry said. The class produced a simple boil cure potion. Harry's came out correct, not spectacularly, because potions required a different kind of patience than spellwork and the physical precision of chopping and measuring was something he was good at but which had different variables than he was used to, but correct, clean, the right color. Neville's cauldron melted. Ron's turned orange. Hermione's was perfect and she and Harry compared notes afterward in a way that made Snape pause at their bench with a complicated expression before moving on without comment. On the way out, Draco fell into step beside Harry in the dungeon corridor. His two companions, Crabbe and Goyle, names and faces now filed, were not with him, which was deliberate. Ballsy, Draco said, without particular rancor. In Snape's class. I said what was true, Harry said. Snape doesn't like being corrected. Nobody does, Harry said. But I'm not going to say something wrong to make someone comfortable. He looked at Draco. Neither would you. A pause. Draco's mouth did something. No, he said. I wouldn't. He sounded, for a moment, like himself rather than the performance of himself. Your potions were correct. Thanks. Your transfiguration yesterday was very clean. Draco glanced at him sideways. You noticed. I noticed things, Harry said. They walked a few more steps. Crabbe and Goyle appeared at the end of the corridor and Draco's posture shifted fractionally, not much, but enough. The performance reassembled itself, not entirely. My father wants to meet you, Draco said again. So you've said. He won't give up either. He's Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. I'd be surprised if he did. He stopped at the corridor junction where their paths diverged. Tell him if he wants to meet me, he can find me at Hogwarts in June, after exams. I'm not going to anyone's house for tea. Something moved in Draco's face. He won't like that. He'll respect it, Harry said. Which is better? He turned down his corridor. See you, Malfoy. He heard Draco stand there for a moment before his footsteps moved in the other direction, and he didn't look back, which was fine. Transfiguration was McGonagall's class, and McGonagall was a different kind of intelligence than Snape. Where Snape's was cutting and self-protective, McGonagall's was rigorously honest, the kind that had no patience for dishonesty in itself or anyone else, which Harry found immediately comfortable. She turned into a cat and back with the perfect efficiency of someone for whom this transformation is less impressive than tying one's shoes, and Harry watched it and felt a pulse of something in his chest, recognition. The Kodadama of the thing was visible to him, the understanding of what she'd done. She hadn't pretended to be a cat, she'd understood herself as something that could be both, and the understanding had done the rest. Mr. Potter, she said at the end of class, when students were filing out. Her voice was her public voice, but the eyes were doing something different. He stayed while the others went. She looked at him for a moment across the desk. You managed the match-to-needle transformation in approximately 4 minutes, she said. The match was already mostly needle, Harry said. Once you understand the essential structure, the magic is, he searched for the right word. Agreement, rather than force. She looked at him steadily. That is an extremely advanced theoretical position for a first-year student. I had a good teacher. Isamu Kurosawa, she said. He hadn't been surprised she'd know the name. She was McGonagall. She had done her homework 4 years ago and kept the file current. He was always gifted. A pause. You know I sent letters. I know, Harry said. I asked him to write back to you. I'm sorry it was just the one. Something in her expression shifted, not softened, exactly. Clarified. Are you well? Very, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. The fireplace behind her desk crackled. Your mother, she said, then stopped, assembled herself. Your mother was one of the finest magical minds I've ever encountered. She understood magic the way you appear to understand it, from the inside. She picked up her quill and looked at the papers on her desk, which was clearly a thing she did when she had said something she wasn't going to take back but also wasn't going to elaborate on. I expect a great deal from you this year. I won't disappoint you, Harry said. Not as a promise made to impress. As a statement of existing intent. She made a small sound and waved him out in the brisk, fond way that would become one of the most familiar gestures of Harry's Hogwarts career. The thing that happened in the first week with Quirrell was subtle and Harry nearly missed it, which was in itself notable. Defense against the dark arts was Quirrell's class, and Quirrell was a study in contradiction. The stammer was constant, the nervous manner was constant, the turban was enormous and smelled of garlic and something else Harry couldn't initially identify. He taught basic defense theory with the frantic, apologetic energy of someone deeply uncomfortable with their own subject matter. Harry sat in the first class and listened and did the work. It was real work, not difficult for him but not trivial, and through all of it the coal in his chest did something quiet and specific. It went cold. Not off. Not extinguished. Cold. The way it went when he was around something that his intent recognized as requiring attention. He'd felt it twice in 4 years, once near an old dark artifact Isamu showed him as an educational example, and once near a place in the mountain forest where something had died badly a long time ago. He felt it in Quirrell's classroom, somewhere directional, toward the front, toward Quirrell specifically, but underneath Quirrell, beneath the performance of the stammer and the nervous hands. He said nothing. He watched. After class he walked out with Ron and noted, for the first time, the specific way Quirrell moved around students, avoiding contact with absolute consistency, the way someone avoids contact with a sore spot. "Did Quirrell seem strange to you?" he asked Ron. "Quirrell's always strange," Ron said. "Fred and George say he was different last year. Went traveling over the summer and came back." Ron moved his hand in a vague gesture. "Came back different," Harry said. "Different weird from usual weird," Ron said. Harry thought about this. "What's under that turban?" he said. Ron looked at him. "His head." "Presumably," Harry said. "I want to know what else." Ron looked at him. "That's an odd thing to wonder." "Yes," Harry agreed, and left it there, because he had no conclusions yet, only data, and the Munoma practice meant he was comfortable holding incomplete information without forcing it into a shape it wasn't ready for. He just made note of it. And kept making note of it, every class, every encounter, every time the cold feeling in his chest confirmed the same directional thing. Something was wrong with Quirrell. He'd figure out what. The broomstick situation happened on a Thursday. Harry had found the letter in his robes on the way to Transfiguration, from Madame Hooch, informing him that given his background, which she'd clearly been briefed on by McGonagall, she'd appreciate his honest self-assessment at the flying lesson. He wrote back that he'd flown twice, both times accidentally, and had no formal instruction. She wrote back that she'd appreciate his attendance at the regular lesson with his year group. He went. The broomsticks were arranged on the lawn in 2 rows, and Madame Hooch instructed everyone to hold their right hand over their broom and say up. Harry held his hand over the broomstick and thought, simply, come, with the quality of intent he'd spent 3 years developing, and the broom slapped into his palm before the word had fully formed. Around him there was the general chaos of recalcitrant broomsticks, some rising quickly, some rolling away, some refusing to move at all. Neville's rocketed up and hit him in the chin. Draco, 2 rows over, had his up cleanly. The class was underway for perhaps 7 minutes when Neville, launched by a broomstick that had definitely gotten ahead of him, went up, panicked, and came down badly, ending up on the grass holding his wrist at an angle that suggested it wasn't doing what wrists were supposed to do. In the commotion Draco said something about Neville's remembrall, which had rolled away during the fall, and Draco picked it up with the specific satisfaction of having leverage, and said something else, and mounted his broom and went up. Harry watched this. He looked at Neville on the grass, being attended to by Madame Hooch. He looked at Draco in the air, turning the remembrall over in his hands. He mounted his broom. This was perhaps the point at which a more cautious person would have considered the rules about first-year flying and the consequences of breaking them. Harry considered these things for approximately 1 second, weighed them against the specific irritation of watching Draco perform the leverage game when the leverage was a small glass ball belonging to a nervous boy sitting on the grass with a broken wrist, and took off. He went up fast. The broom was not as good as he'd have liked. School brooms had a bureaucratic quality to them, but it responded to his intent well enough, and he came level with Draco in 3 seconds. Draco looked at him. Surprised and then rapidly not surprised. "Potter," he said. "Malfoy," Harry said. He was hovering, completely still, the broom doing nothing unusual because he had no conflicting intentions about where he was. "Give it back." "First-year rules," Draco said. "No flying without Madame Hooch." "Yes," Harry agreed. "We're both breaking them." "Give it back." Draco looked at him. The calculation was running. "Make it interesting," Draco said. "Catch." He threw the remembrall, high and to the right, with the arm of someone who threw things well and knew it, and it went spinning into the air in a long arc. Harry watched it for 1 second. Banked left, came around, accelerated, reached out his right hand at the exact point where the arc peaked before it began its fall, and closed his fingers around the remembrall before it had descended 6 inches. He came back to a hover beside Draco. He held the remembrall out. "Smooth," Draco said quietly, and the performance was entirely gone for a moment, just Draco saying a true thing. "Don't do it again," Harry said. "No," Draco said. I don't suppose I will. They descended. McGonagall was waiting on the ground and the expression on her face was the one she kept for moments when two conflicting responses were attempting to occupy the same face simultaneously. She looked at Harry. He looked back. My office, she said. After dinner. Of course, Harry said. He landed cleanly, handed Neville his remembrall, and went back to the line. Neville turned the remembrall over in his unhurt hand, the other being held carefully, and looked at Harry with an expression that didn't have a clean translation but which contained gratitude and a kind of wondering recognition. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, Harry said. I mean, Draco Malfoy could have, he wasn't going to drop it on your head, Harry said. He's unpleasant, not cruel. There's a difference. He paused. But he was going to keep it for leverage, and that's its own kind of unkind. Neville was quiet for a moment. You figured all that out up there. I figured it out down here, Harry said. Up there I just caught a ball. Neville's mouth twitched. The office meeting with McGonagall lasted 15 minutes, at the end of which Harry had been appointed Gryffindor Seeker in a clear breach of the first-year rule which McGonagall clearly considered the rule's problem rather than the appointments, and had been told he was not to tell any students until the announcement was made, and had agreed to this condition with a seriousness that satisfied her. He told Ron that evening in the dormitory. Ron sat up in his bed. Seeker, he said. First-year Seeker. It's apparently not entirely done, Harry said. Done? Ron said. Charlie, my brother, he was good, and he was never, he stopped. You're going to be completely insufferable, aren't you? I'll try not to be, Harry said. Ron thought about it. No, he said, I don't think you will, actually. That's the weird thing about you, Harry. You could absolutely be insufferable and you're just, not. Should I be? No, Ron said firmly. Definitely not. Just, he looked at the ceiling. Oliver Wood is going to combust when McGonagall tells him. Oliver Wood did, in fact, combust. In the productive sense. He appeared in the common room the following evening vibrating with contained enthusiasm and organized Harry's first practice session with the focused intensity of someone who has been waiting for a piece of the puzzle that would complete the picture he's been building for 2 years. Harry flew with Wood's direction and did what Wood asked and was, within 40 minutes, doing things on a school broom that made Wood stop talking mid-sentence and stand on the ground below looking upward with an expression of speechless satisfaction. Harry came down. Well? Harry said. I need to talk to McGonagall about getting you a better broom, Wood said. I can work with this one, Harry said. You could work with a particularly sturdy twig, Wood said, with reverence rather than humor. But you deserve better. Harry looked at the school broom. It was battered and had a slight pull to the left. Next week, Harry said. Let me practice with this one first. Knowing the limitations of your tools is useful. Wood stared at him. You're 11, he said. I know, Harry said. Right, Wood said, making notes on his clipboard. Right. Okay. He looked up. See you Tuesday. The night of the first week, Harry sat on his bed in the dormitory after the others had gone to sleep, Ron snoring with the absolute commitment of someone for whom sleep was a serious undertaking, Neville curled under his quilt with Trevor the Toad on the bedside table looking philosophically at nothing, Dean and Seamus in their corner breathing the slow rhythms of the deeply asleep. Harry sat cross-legged with his back against the headboard and held his wand across his palms and did nothing for a while. The castle breathed around him. He'd been feeling it all week, not intrusively, but present, the deep ancient pulse of the thing, like a heartbeat so slow you only noticed it in the quiet hours. The portraits slept in their frames. The suits of armor stood their thoughtless watch. Somewhere above him, in the astronomy tower, an owl called once. He thought about the cold feeling in Quirrell's classroom. He thought about the locked trapdoor on the 3rd floor that a prefect had mentioned, casually, as a place nobody went because the headmaster had said not to. He thought about the Gringotts break-in he'd read about in the Prophet at breakfast, a vault broken into on the 31st of July. His own Gringotts visit had been the 31st of July. He'd been in Vault 687 and then the secondary vault. There had been something in Vault 713 before the break-in. Something moved to a different location for safety. He pressed his thumb against his wand and felt it warm in response. Something was at Hogwarts. Something that needed hiding. And something, or someone, had already tried to steal it and failed. And Quirrell's classroom made the coal in his chest go cold in a specific directional way. He didn't have enough yet. He sat with the incomplete information and let it sit and did not force it. The way you let tea steep, patience was not the same as inaction. But he noted it. He named it, in the private language that was neither English nor Japanese but the deeper thing underneath. This is the shape of the danger here. I see you. I'm not afraid. Outside the dormitory window, the Scottish mountains were enormous and dark and patient, and the stars above them were very bright, and Harry Potter sat in the firelit dimness and breathed the mountain's lesson, stillness, 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 and was entirely, completely, deliberately awake. Chapter 5 Old Magic, New Walls. October arrived like a verdict. The castle went cold overnight between September and the new month, the kind of cold that had intent behind it, Highland autumn pushing through the window frames, finding the gaps in old stone, making the candles work harder. The lake went grey and serious. The forest on the hillside turned color in long diagonal bands, amber and rust and a deep wine red that was almost purple in the morning light, and Harry watched it from the Gryffindor Tower window at 6 in the morning while the dormitory slept and thought that the mountain in Nagano had done the same thing in October and the colors had been different but the feeling was identical, the year turning its shoulder, the world getting ready for something. He wrote to Isamu that morning. Long letter, longer than usual, covering the first month in detail, classes, teachers, the Quidditch appointment, the cold feeling in Quirrell's classroom, the whispers about the third-floor corridor. He wrote about Ron and Hermione and Neville, described them without sentimentality, let Isamu read between the lines the way he always could. At the end he wrote, I think something is being kept here. I think someone is trying to get to it. I think Quirrell is the mechanism, not the mind. There's something behind him that I can feel but not yet name. Tell me if you know anything about protections placed on old magical artifacts. Whatever this is, it has been moved recently and hidden carefully. The castle feels it too. I don't think Hogwarts is neutral about this. He sealed the letter and fed it to Hannah, who received it with the gravity of a professional receiving a commission, and launched herself from the window into the October morning. The Quidditch practice situation resolved itself by mid-October into a clean and functional rhythm. Wood ran sessions on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, which Harry attended and during which he did exactly what Wood asked, no more, no less, because Wood was a good captain and had earned the deference of the people he was directing. He wasn't like Isamu. Wood's intelligence was passionate, specific, and mostly organized around the sport rather than anything beyond it, but he knew Quidditch the way Isamu knew magic, which was from the inside, and Harry respected competence in its specific form wherever he found it. The team received him with varying degrees of warmth. The twins were immediately, enthusiastically allied. They appreciated Harry's willingness to demonstrate things without being asked and his total absence of the self-consciousness that made some new players impossible to practice against. Katie Bell, Alicia Spinnett, and Angelina Johnson received him with the measured assessment of older players watching a younger one and then, over the course of 2 practices, upgraded their assessment to something warmer. You're going to win us the cup, Angelina said, at the end of the 3rd session. She said it plainly, without flattery, as a tactical observation. We're going to win the cup, Harry said, which got a grin from her and an approving look from Wood. On the mornings before practice, Harry flew alone. This was non-negotiable and the team had learned not to schedule around it. He took the school broom, still working with it, still learning its limits and using them, and went up in the grey pre-dawn and flew without purpose, without Wood's drills, without the structure of seeking. Just him and the sky and the intention of flight, which was, he'd found, the most purely joyful thing he'd discovered in England. He'd enjoyed flying in the abstract when Isamu described it. Nothing had prepared him for the actual thing, the specific freedom of altitude, the cold air, the particular visual clarity of being higher than the surrounding landscape. He flew without thinking, without the untamed engagement of magic, just moved through the air with the natural instinct of someone whose body had been trained for 3 years to respond immediately and precisely to what his mind asked of it. On one of these mornings, coming out of a long banking turn above the lake, he passed Dumbledore. The headmaster was standing on the astronomy tower in his purple robes, watching the sky, and he looked up as Harry curved past, and their eyes met at about 40 feet of separation, and Harry tilted his broom in a slight, specific acknowledgement. Dumbledore did not wave. He nodded. Harry flew on. It was the first direct communication they'd had. Harry had been in the castle for 5 weeks and Dumbledore had been, in that time, a presence that registered from the staff table at mealtimes and occasionally in the corridors, always at a distance, always with that precise nod, the half-moon glasses catching the light. He had not summoned Harry. He had not made any formal overture. This told Harry several things. One was that Dumbledore was giving him space, choosing not to make the first approach, letting Harry establish himself without the weight of a headmaster's attention. Another was that Dumbledore was watching carefully without appearing to, which was its own form of communication. Harry had no objection to the watching. He was watching back. The first substantive class conflict came in the 3rd week of October, in defense against the dark arts, and it came from nothing complicated, just Harry answering a question correctly. Quirrell had asked about the standard defensive response to a confundus charm in a direct confrontation. The textbook answer was a specific counterincantation, followed by the standard wand-lowering protocol. Harry said, the textbook answer isn't wrong but it creates a half-second gap between counter and recovery that leaves you open. The better response is a redirectional shield that encompasses the confundus in transit and bounces it. You use the attacker's own cast against their focus. Quirrell had been at the front of the classroom as usual, and the stammer had been in full performance, and he'd asked the question with the distracted air of a man conducting a class while thinking about something else, and when Harry spoke the distraction stopped. The stammer stopped. For 2 seconds, exactly 2, Quirrell looked at Harry without the nervous flutter, without the apologetic body language, with flat and focused attention. The coal in Harry's chest went cold. Then the stammer came back. Quirrell made a vague positive sound about Harry's answer, moved on. The class proceeded. Nobody else appeared to have noticed the 2-second drop. Hermione had noticed. She caught Harry's eye across the aisle with an expression that was a question. Harry gave her a tiny headshake. Not now. After class she fell into step beside him in the corridor, Ron on his other side, Neville a half step behind, and she said, very quietly, that wasn't a stammer. No, Harry said. He has a stammer all the time and then he just, didn't. For exactly as long as it took him to really look at you. She spoke in the quick, precise way she had when she was assembling something in real time. That's not an anxiety response. That's a performance. Yes, Harry said. So why is he performing a stammer? Concealment, Harry said. You make yourself look like the least threatening person in the room, nobody looks too hard. Ron, who had been following this with a slight delay, said, but why does a Hogwarts teacher need to look unthreatening? They all thought about this. He doesn't, Harry said. Hogwarts teachers have institutional protection. They have no reason to need concealment. He paused. Unless they're not primarily a Hogwarts teacher. What does that mean? Neville said. It means, Harry said, that Quirrell might be here for a reason that has nothing to do with teaching defense. He didn't say more than that. Not because he was protecting them, he'd have been straight with them if he'd known more, but because incomplete theories were worse than no theory, and he was still working with the available data. Ron walked beside him for a moment. The 3rd-floor corridor, he said. Yes, Harry said. You think what's there and Quirrell are connected. I think it would be a significant coincidence if they weren't. What's on the 3rd floor? Neville asked. We don't know, Hermione said. And we've been told not to go there. Which is useful information, Harry said, in the sense that things people are told not to go near are generally near something worth going near. Hermione gave him a look. You're not going to suggest we break the rule? Not yet, Harry said. We don't need to. Whatever's there is being protected by the castle as well as Dumbledore's instructions. It's not going anywhere soon. He glanced down the corridor toward the direction of the third floor. I want to understand Quirrell better first. How? Ron said. By paying attention, Harry said. Which costs nothing and tells you everything, eventually. The letter from Isamu arrived on a Wednesday. Harry collected it from Hannah in the Morning Post. The owl had developed the habit of landing directly on Harry's shoulder rather than the general owlpost area, which Hermione found charming and the rest of the Gryffindor table found impressive in a slightly unsettling way, and read it in the corridor between breakfast and charms. Isamu's letters were always short and always dense, the way compression works when you have a great deal to say and a deep preference for efficiency. What you describe at Hogwarts is consistent with historical accounts of certain artifacts of Eastern origin, specifically those made dual purpose, created to do something and simultaneously to prevent something. The most powerful of these require layered protection because the artifact itself generates a kind of attention. It pulls at those with sufficient dark intent. Distance is usually the best protection. But someone has moved it close, which means they either had no better option or they believe the castle's protections are superior to geography. The cold feeling you describe in your teacher's classroom concerns me more than the artifact. What you are sensing is a presence within a presence, a secondary inhabitation. This is dark magic of a serious order, rarely attempted, rarely survived. The host is usually not in control. Do not confront this directly until you understand what you are confronting. Watch the interactions between the host and the artifact's location. The inhabiting presence will not be able to resist testing the protections. Watch for those tests. The mountain is cold but well. Tanaka-san asks after you. Write more often. Harry read this 3 times, folded it, put it in his inside pocket. Secondary inhabitation. A presence within a presence. He thought about the cold feeling. The way it sat inside Quirrell like something waiting, something that occasionally pressed against the surface, those 2 seconds of flat focus, the specific quality of attention that didn't match the performance around it. He thought about Voldemort, who had been a name in a story for 10 years, the monster under the bed of an entire world, the thing nobody said directly. He thought about the wand in his inside pocket and what Ollivander had said about brother wands, and the phoenix that had given 2 feathers, and why. He filed this under probable and serious and not yet. Hermione found the mirror of Eriste by accident. That was how she described it. She'd been returning a book to the restricted section after getting special permission from Flitwick, had taken a wrong turn on the 5th floor, and had ended up in a disused classroom where the mirror stood against the far wall and had shown her something that made her stand there for considerably longer than she'd intended. She told Harry about it that evening in the common room, quietly, while Ron was playing chess with Neville. Her voice was flat in the way voices go flat when describing something that hit harder than expected. It showed me my parents, she said. They were proud of me. My mum was crying. My dad had his arm around her. They were looking at me and they were, she stopped. I've been worried all term that I'd disappoint them. That this world would take me away from them in some way they couldn't follow. She looked at her hands. The mirror showed me what I want most. Harry thought about this carefully. Did you want to go back, he asked. To the mirror? Yes. She looked at him. Yes, she admitted. I wanted to go back immediately. Don't, Harry said. She blinked. Not because the feeling is wrong, he said. The feeling is real. But the mirror shows you the wanting, not the having. It's a still image of desire, and if you go back to it you'll stand there feeding on the image instead of doing the thing that might actually get you what you want. He paused. Which is to be here, be brilliant, make them proud by being what you've already become. Not by standing in front of a mirror looking at a vision of it. Hermione was quiet for a long time. "Where is it?" Harry asked. "I don't think I should tell you," she said. He looked at her. "You'd look into it," she said. "You can't not. And I don't know what you'd see, and I think some things are better not to see directly." Harry considered the accuracy of this. She was right that he'd look. Curiosity was not a thing he managed by avoidance. But she was also right that the mirror's particular trap was specific to desire, and whatever he desired most was complicated enough that seeing it in a mirror was probably not the ideal way to examine it. "All right," he said. She looked surprised that he'd agreed. "You're right," he said simply. "And you were right to tell me about it rather than keep it to yourself." "I didn't want to keep thinking about it alone," she said. "You don't have to," Harry said. "That's the point of all of us." She made a sound that was nearly a laugh and looked at her charms homework, and the conversation shifted, and Harry thought about the mirror and what he might have seen and let it go with the same discipline he brought to everything he didn't yet need to act on. The Halloween troll was, from a purely structural standpoint, a significant escalation. Harry had felt the castle shift at dinner, a change in the deep background pulse, something in the lower corridors suddenly wrong in the way of a door open that should have been shut. He'd been about to say something to Ron when Quirrell burst in, and his performance of panic was notably good, and the hall erupted, and McGonagall was up and organizing evacuation in seconds. Harry leaned toward Ron. "Where's Hermione?" Ron's face changed. "She's been in the girls' bathroom all afternoon. We had he stopped. "An argument." "She doesn't know." Harry was already standing. Ron stood with him. They looked at each other. "Come on," Harry said. They went quickly, against the flow of students being organized into house columns, ducking behind a tapestry when Percy's voice rose in their direction, moving through the castle's side passages with Harry navigating by the cold sense of wrongness that was getting stronger as they went down. The smell hit them first. Then the sound, something large and heavy, and not thinking about what it was doing, which was often more dangerous than something intelligent. They found the girls' bathroom and Hermione inside it and the mountain troll in the same moment, and the troll was 12 feet of grey muscle and very little cognition, and it had just spotted Hermione, who was backed against the wall between two sinks with her hands raised and doing something quite impressive with a defensive charm that the troll was simply too large and too stupid to be effectively stopped by. Harry assessed the room in 1 second. Troll, large, slow, heavy, limited peripheral vision, predominantly motivated by immediate stimuli. Club in right hand. Low ceiling relative to its height, which limited its swing arc, stone floor, which was slippery. Hermione, scared but functional, buying time, keeping her head. Ron, behind Harry, wand out, slightly pale, ready. Harry walked forward. "Hey," he said. The troll turned from Hermione to Harry with the ponderous certainty of something that has never had to turn quickly. Harry waited until he had its complete attention, the small red eyes tracking toward him, and then directed a precise burst of intent upward and sideways, directly at the club. Not a violent force. Just a specific, targeted disruption of the troll's grip, targeting the pressure points between its fingers, loosening them with the surgical precision of 3 years of controlled kinonagare practice. The club fell. The troll looked at its hand. It looked at the floor where the club was. This took several seconds because the conceptual gap between have and don't have was apparently significant cognitive territory. Harry walked to the left, keeping the troll's attention tracking. "Get out," he said to Hermione, level, calm, not looking at her. "Both of you, go. Get McGonagall." "Harry," Hermione started. "Now, please," Harry said. "It's fine." "You cannot be serious," Ron said. "I'm completely serious," Harry said. "I'll be right behind you." The troll reached for Harry with one enormous grey hand, not maliciously, in the limited way of things that interact with the world purely through proximity and displacement, and Harry stepped back, keeping the distance, keeping its attention, and pointed his wand at the puddle of water on the floor around the troll's feet. He understood water. Ki no nagare, direction of intent, no force. He redirected the water molecules at the stone beneath the troll's right foot from solid-state surface tension to frictionless, and the troll's foot slid forward, and 12 feet of muscle and very little grace went sideways with a sound like a building deciding to lie down. Harry stepped back from the impact, which was significant. The troll lay on the bathroom floor looking at the ceiling with an expression of baffled injury. Harry looked at it for a moment. Then he stepped over one enormous grey leg and walked out of the bathroom. Ron and Hermione were 6 feet down the corridor, not having left. Harry looked at them. "I said go," he said. "We weren't going," Ron said, as though this were obvious. "You were in there with a troll." "I noticed," Harry said. "Are you all right?" Hermione said. She was still slightly pale, but her wand was out and her posture had the upright quality of someone who has been frightened and chosen to metabolize it into readiness. "Fine," Harry said. "It slipped. Trolls have very poor balance when one foot goes out." He looked back at the bathroom door, which was hanging at an angle, and at the sounds of McGonagall and Snape and Quirrell coming fast from the far end of the corridor. "This is probably going to be a conversation." "Probably," Ron agreed. McGonagall arrived and took in the scene, 3 first years in the corridor, sounds of a large creature on the floor in the bathroom, a distinctly anticlimactic absence of obvious disaster, with the expression of someone whose preparedness for the worst outcome has just encountered a better one than expected. She looked at Harry. He looked back. "The troll is in the bathroom," he said. "It slipped on some water. I don't think it's seriously hurt, but it should probably be moved before it stands up." McGonagall made a sound. Behind her, Snape's expression had gone through several phases that Harry couldn't entirely interpret because Snape's face was a very controlled instrument. Quirrell stood at the back, and Harry, even in the middle of sorting out the logistics of the evening, noted the cold feeling from his direction, pressing, interested, paying a different kind of attention than the stammer and the nervous hand suggested. "What were you doing down here?" McGonagall said. "A fraction of a second." Harry looked at Ron and Ron looked at Hermione and Hermione, who was honest to a degree that occasionally created problems for her, said, "I was already here. I didn't know about the troll. They came to find me." She paused. "I would have been all right," she added, and while this was partially bravado it was also partially true and all 3 of them knew it. McGonagall looked at them for a long moment. 5 points each, from Gryffindor, she said. "For being out of the dormitory without authorization." She paused. "And 5 points each, to Gryffindor. For showing the presence of mind and loyalty to go back for a fellow student." She looked at them with an expression that said very clearly that she found the entire situation simultaneously exasperating and quietly satisfying. "Go to your dormitory. All 3 of you. Now." They went. On the stairs, Ron let out a long breath and said, "You froze the floor." "Made it slippery," Harry said. "Not frozen." "Semantics," Ron said. "Important semantics," Harry said. "How did you know it would work?" "I didn't," Harry said. "But it was the most efficient option available and I understood the mechanism. The rest was arithmetic." Ron absorbed this. "You treat everything like a problem with a solution," he said. "Not critically. Observationally." "Everything is," Harry said. "Even trolls." "Especially trolls," Harry said. "Trolls are straightforward. It's the complicated things that need more thought." Hermione had been quiet up the stairs and she stopped at the landing and turned to look at Harry, and her expression was doing several things at once, gratitude and independence jostling for space, the way they do in people who want to be helped and also want not to need help and are still working out how to hold both. "Thank you," she said. Directly, without the complication. "You were handling it," Harry said. "I just handled it faster." "No," she said. "You came looking for me." When you didn't have to. She said it matter-of-factly, a piece of data she was going to file accurately. Thank you. Harry nodded. We look out for each other, Ron said, from behind them both, as though this were already established fact requiring no further discussion. Something in all three of them settled at that, quietly and completely, the way things settle when they find the right place and know they're not moving. November brought Quidditch. The Gryffindor-Slytherin match was the first of the season, and the atmosphere around it in the week preceding was the specific atmosphere of institutional rivalry made physical, old scores, house pride, the Quidditch Cup that Slytherin had held for 7 years and that Oliver would discuss with the specific passion of a man with a personal grievance. Harry was calm about it in a way that comforted some of the team and unnerved others. You're not nervous at all, Katie Bell said, at the end of the final practice before the match. Should I be? Harry said. First match, Slytherin, most hostile crowd in the league, first-year seeker, yes, Harry said. But being nervous about it doesn't help me fly better. She looked at him. What does? Flying, Harry said. She laughed, which was the right response. The morning of the match, Harry ate breakfast, which was the sensible thing to do, and listened to the Weasley twins deliver an escalating series of increasingly creative assessments of Slytherin's various character failings, which was the entertaining thing to do, and he sat in the stands before the team went down to change and watched the Slytherin team warm up. Their seeker was Terrence Higgs, 6th year, experienced, quick. Harry watched him move and filed it. Fast horizontal reactions. Slightly late on verticals. Leaned into turns rather than banking through them, which was efficient but predictable. He went to change. Wood gave the speech, passionate, detailed, thoroughly prepared. Harry listened with attention and not impatience, because Wood had earned the room. Out on the pitch, the noise was a fact of the environment and Harry treated it as such. Thousands of people in the stands, the colors of the houses, Lee Jordan's commentary drifting in and out, Madame Hooch with her silver hair and her whistle. The snitch release caught the light. Harry watched it go and lost it in 3 seconds, which was expected. The snitch was designed to be lost quickly, and settled into the seeker's primary work, which was not finding the snitch but attending to the whole pitch with the quality of attention that Munoma had built over 3 years. Not looking for the snitch. Letting the snitch become visible. 15 minutes in, something happened that was not the snitch. Harry's broom lurched. Not a mechanical fault. Not turbulence. A specific, targeted interference. The broom kicked under him as if someone had grabbed the tail and yanked, then released, then yanked again, an erratic twitching that required constant correction and was deliberately destabilizing. He held on. He brought the coal in his chest up and grounded himself in his intent. I am on this broom, the broom is under me, I am not falling, and the correction was sufficient to stay mounted but it required active effort, constant, which was the point. He looked down. The teacher's box. His eyes went across the faces and stopped at Quirrell, who was mouthing something, very faint, eyes fixed on Harry's broom. Cold. Cold, cold, cold. He held on. Hermione had seen it too. He found out later she'd moved through the stand crowd with the focused efficiency of a person who has identified a problem and is going to solve it right now, lit Quirrell's robes with a small but specifically targeted fire charm that required Quirrell to break his focus to deal with it, and the broom stopped twitching in the moment the concentration broke. Harry straightened. Took one clear, settling breath. Looked at the pitch. The snitch was at the far end, hovering just above the Slytherin goalposts, catching the late November light. Harry went. No hesitation. No calculation in the conscious sense. The 3 years of practice had put the decision below the level of thought, in the body, in the intent. He went like a thrown stone, perfectly directed, and Higgs saw him and understood and came from the other side but he was too far and too late and Harry caught the snitch at about 30 feet altitude and 40 miles per hour with his right hand, clean, and pulled up and came around. The crowd was very loud. He landed and Wood was already running and the twins were airborne and celebrating in what might technically have been against regulations but nobody was dealing with that right now. Ron was at the edge of the pitch. He'd come down from the stands and was standing there with his arms out in a gesture that said everything and nothing, and Harry walked toward him and Ron grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him once, grinning so hard it looked like it might be structural. 12 minutes, Ron said. 14, Harry said. 12. Lee Jordan timed it. I'll trust Lee Jordan, Harry said. Ron laughed. Harry was laughing too, he realized, properly, the way you do when something has gone exactly right and the relief and the joy are identical. Hermione reached them. She was pink in the face and slightly disheveled from moving through the crowd, and she said, briskly, someone was jinxing your broom. I know, Harry said. You stopped it. I set Quirrell on fire, she said, with the tone of someone filing a bureaucratic complaint. Small fire. Contained. But still. She looked at him. It was Quirrell. I know, Harry said again. What does that, not here, Harry said. Tonight. She looked at him. Okay, she said, because she trusted him, which was its own remarkable thing. That night in the common room, the four of them, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, sat in the back corner while the Quidditch victory celebration moved around them in cheerful waves, and Harry told them what he knew. He told them about the cold feeling. About Isamu's letter and the secondary inhabitation. About the Gringotts break-in on July 31st, timed to his own visit. About the third-floor corridor and the obvious inference. About the 2 seconds in the defense class when Quirrell's stammer dropped. He told them clearly and in order, because they deserved the full information, because they were in this space with him, and making that choice with partial information was unfair to them. When he was done, Neville said, very quietly, you know who? I think so, Harry said. Is inside Quirrell, Neville said. Or attached to him, Harry said. Isamu's letter said inhabitation. I don't think it's clean. I think Quirrell still exists, but something is using him. Ron's face had gone through several stages while Harry talked and arrived at something resolved, which was, Harry had learned, Ron's version of scared but decided. So what do we do? We watch, Harry said. We gather information. We tell Dumbledore when we have enough to be taken seriously, because going to Dumbledore with incomplete information gives him the option of telling us it's nothing and dismissing us. Going with complete information gives him nothing to dismiss. When will we have enough? Hermione said. When I know what's on the 3rd floor, Harry said. And when I understand the protection. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You're going to go down there. Eventually, Harry said. When it's necessary. Not before. And if it becomes necessary quickly? Ron said. Then we'll deal with that, Harry said. He looked at all 3 of them. Neville was sitting upright, hands steady on his knees. The clenched anxiety had been gone for weeks now, replaced by something more grounded. Hermione's expression held the complicated quality of someone who was both alarmed and intellectually engaged, and was mostly letting the intellectual engagement run. Ron was looking at Harry with the directness he always brought to important things. You don't have to be part of this, Harry said. Any of you. This is it connects to me specifically, to whatever Voldemort wants and why I'm connected to it. None of them moved. Don't, Ron said simply. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying, Ron said. We're not going anywhere. Don't say it again. Neville nodded once. Hermione said, I've already started researching historical object protections in the library. I'll tell you what I find. Harry looked at them for a moment. Okay, he said. The fire crackled. The victory party moved around them. Outside the tower windows, the November night had come fully in, cold and clear and enormous. December arrived, and with it a quality of cold that was different from October's. This one had permanence in it, the settling in cold of a Scottish winter committing to its course. The lake froze at the edges. The grounds went white. Inside the castle the fires burned higher and the portraits huddled closer to their frames, and the ghosts, who were presumably impervious to temperature, continued their habitual movements with additional visible smugness. Harry received a package from Isamu for Christmas. Books, as expected, 3 texts he hadn't found in Hogwarts library, including one on the specific branch of Kodadama that dealt with the naming of hidden things, which he read in 2 days and which aligned with a thought he'd been building since Ollivanders. Every name has a true form, Isamu had taught him. And the true form of a name is more powerful than the bearer's own power over themselves. He thought about Voldemort, the name nobody said, the power that came from the deliberate withholding of the name, the shape of the fear it created. He thought about what it meant to know the true name of something dark. Not the performance of it. The actual core of it. He thought about the brother wands and the phoenix feather and the specific resonance between destruction and rebirth, because the phoenix was both things and its feather carried both. He was building something in his understanding, laying down one piece after another, and it wasn't complete yet but the shape of it was becoming visible. On Christmas morning, he opened one more package, wrapped in plain paper, left on his bed with no note. Inside was the invisibility cloak he'd collected from Gringotts and packed in his trunk. He'd left no note attached to it. He'd simply been waiting. A card fell out of the wrapping. Your father left this in my keeping. It is time it was returned. Use it well. No signature. Harry looked at the cloak for a long time. He looked at the unsigned card. He thought about Dumbledore on the astronomy tower at dawn, watching him fly. He put the cloak on. In the empty dormitory, he stood in front of the mirror and saw no one. He took it off and folded it and stood for a moment holding it, the liquid shadow fabric pooling in his hands, and thought about his father, who had apparently also sneaked around under this cloak, and about a man who had kept it all these years and returned it without asking for anything. It was the most complicated feeling he had about Dumbledore. Not trust, not yet, but a recognition that the man was capable of the kind of care that expressed itself through restraint. That he'd left Harry alone for 5 weeks, hadn't pushed, hadn't summoned, and had found this way of saying I see you without the words. Harry put the cloak in his trunk. He'd talked to Dumbledore before the end of term. Not yet. But before. The winter settled on the castle and the mountains around it and the frozen lake, and Harry stood at the tower window in the Christmas quiet and looked at all of it, and the coal in his chest burned clear and warm and steady, and below in the depths of the castle something old and dark and waiting sat behind its protections and did not know that the thing it was waiting to find was already thinking about it. That it had been thinking about it for a while. That it was not afraid.